Okay, almost right after I turned off the camera, I switched to a rag, a piece of old bed sheet, because I was tired of pulling little bits of paper towel out of the bottom of the boat. So I'd start with a rag, it's easier. And you can see the mask, and I have the fans going, so I did not smell a single thing. Okay, now we're ready to progress. We've done the whole boat on the inside. We have not wiped off the outside yet, but we've done the whole boat on the inside. And now we will get to progress and do the next step. The next step is coating the inside with clear, so it saturates the wood. And then we're going to run a carbon fiber ribbon so it overlaps the bottom piece of the plywood about ½ inch. That's all the overlap you need, and it comes up and stops just about 1/8 of an inch below the top edge here, so it doesn't interfere with the top edge. And that's going to be a carbon fiber ribbon. The carbon fiber ribbon likes to lay on a smooth surface though. We've got the rivet effect here. So right where the carbon fiber ribbon runs, about 1 inch wide, we're going to put a little bed of pre-thickened resin. And then we'll lay the carbon fiber ribbon on top, saturate the carbon fiber ribbon, and that will stiffen these strides. That gives it a lot of strength running this way in the wood, but not nearly as much strength running up and down. So that's what the carbon fiber will do without adding much weight. It'll give us the strength up and down. So these, no matter what's happening, these planks can never split and separate or anything like that. Very, very strong and very light. Great having these modern materials like carbon fiber to blend with our traditional or semi-traditional wooden boat. Okay, so we'll be back soon with everything we need to get that done. Okay, we're back, and it's getting a little bit late, and I'm kind of hungry, but I'm kind of really eager to progress. So we could do the whole thing at once, but I'm just going to do one section now to show you how it goes, and then I'm going to stop because it's getting late. But it's kind of fun. I don't like to stop. It's too much fun. Okay, so here's your carbon fiber ribbon. You want to handle this pretty delicately. The first thing to know about this carbon fiber ribbon is sometimes there's a clear plastic poly piece on here. It's fairly thin plastic. It's not that obvious. So you want to look at it real carefully. Make sure there's not a piece of plastic stuck to it, because the plastic will not, the epoxy cannot stick to the plastic, and certainly with the plastic on the carbon fiber, the epoxy can't saturate the carbon fiber, so the whole thing would be useless. So make sure there's not plastic, a very thin piece of plastic on one side or the other. Now you can see, well, you know, you can't probably see it. I don't know if you can see it or not. Maybe with reflection you might be able to see it. There's a little scrim, you know, just this random pattern of like a dribble, very thin dribble on the surface of that. This is, oh, now I can't remember. I think 1,000 strands, or maybe it's more. Maybe it's 10,000. I think it's 10,000 strands of carbon fiber in the 1 inch ribbon. Just a phenomenal number. They're much thinner than hair, a human hair. And so those would just be loose, except for that scrim that they have dribbled on top of it. Now that'll dissolve with the resin. So when you start putting the resin on top, that scrim will dissolve, and then you do have loose fibers, but they're coated with the resin at that point. But you do want to make sure that you don't start pushing those fibers sideways. You never brush sideways on ribbon. You always brush up and down as much as possible, unless you're just very, very gentle brushing sideways. So that tells you a little bit about the carbon fiber ribbon, strongest material for its weight known to man. Okay, now we're going to measure it. We're going to come down onto the bottom piece just about ½ inch. This end isn't quite square. That doesn't hurt anything, but I like it to be square. Okay, so that looks a little more square. Okay, and then this stuff is not great for scissors, but it's not quite as bad as fiberglass is. You could also use a utility knife cutting against a piece of plywood, but you want to make sure you don't pull the fibers apart when you do that. You have to support it really closely on each side and cut very delicately. Okay, so we have our first piece of carbon fiber cut here, and that's going to be just right, just like that. Just 1/8 of an inch, or at least some amount below the very top edge of the plank. We don't want it sticking up above the top edge. That'd make it hard. We'd have to sand it off. It's just extra work. And then in the bottom, it's just 1/2 inch onto the plywood, 1/2 inch or so. I think you can just do that by eye. You don't really need to measure all this. Okay, now we'll mix up our epoxy. We're mixing up enough to coat this whole section here. And now on this section, we don't want to coat, this is the place where we're going to pull out this frame later on and then let those 2 pieces of plywood at the bottom pull together tight. So we don't want to get epoxy in that gap now, because then it won't close up. So we're going to coat down a little bit on the plywood, but not quite so much as we might other places. And once we knock the frames out, we'll be coming back in and coating again where the frames were. That's another point. I don't think I want to coat right up against this frame, because if I butt the epoxy right up against that tape there on the frame, there'll be a little ridge where the epoxy wants to climb up the tape a little bit. And then when I knock the frame out, there'll be a little ridge there that you could sand off or leave. But if you just coat to within about 1/2 inch of these frames, that'll be the best. Then there won't be any ridge, and when we knock the frame out, we'll finish coating that area where it's not coated yet. Okay, and then one more point so we don't forget. When we get back to the middle of the boat, and we'll talk about where that's going to be more precisely, we are not going to coat the plywood at all, because we will be laying a mat of Kevlar in there to stiffen the bottom where you'll be stepping into the boat to sit down. Oh, and then one more point. We're going to, again, you don't need to do this, but anywhere where there might be a pencil line on the plywood from your marking or anything, if there's any pencil lines, now's the time to get rid of them. So, 2 ways to do that. You can use, a good eraser, and that'll take them right off. Or you can use a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper, real fine sandpaper that'll just erase the lines without abrading the wood. So 2 ways to do that. Or you can leave the lines. Probably won't ever bother you. Won't ever see them. Okay. But you'll know they're there. That's the if only you'd erase those lines. No, the lines don't really matter. Okay, so our syringe is here, and we're going to mix up 4 large marks. That should, well, actually I'm going to keep it to 3 right now. Okay, into the mixing container now. Then pull the plunger back a little bit, and then hardener. Just a little bit of stickiness on my glove, so I'll wipe that off. Best to have the paper towels right beside you. If something gets just a little bit sticky, it's going to get the next thing sticky, and pretty soon everything is sticky, and it gets worse and worse. So you want to be meticulously neat with epoxy. Don't get anything sticky. And then we're looking for 3 small marks of hardener. And there's that. And plunger back. And lids on. This is a good reminder, don't leave your open containers sitting where they might get knocked over. Okay. I'm using one of the small cut brushes for mixing. I don't like using the big brushes for mixing. And if I was going to go ahead and do the whole length of the boat right now, one section at a time, I would probably use the bigger brush. But since I'm just doing one small bow section, I'm just going to use the little brush. Okay, it's well mixed. Okay, and down in here, where we have a real tight joint on the bottom, I can go ahead and coat it, because that's permanent.
I just don't want to get too close to where we're going to pull it together later. Otherwise we won't be able to pull it together. So you can see the bigger brush would go a lot faster here. And it would be fine to use it, but since if you're just doing one section at a time, or maybe your first section you want to just experiment with it, get the techniques, and then move ahead and start using your big brush for the other sections. Small brush works well enough though. And again, just a reminder, on the small brushes, it works best to trim them. The brush bristles are too floppy otherwise. On the big brush, you can trim it a little bit, but it also works pretty well untrimmed. Now on these, on the inner sections, I would go back to the 1-inch brush for doing these sections, because you're not doing big areas at a time. The 1-inch brush will be just right. And again, this coating is important. It's your second chance to seal up any cracks between the wood pieces that might leak. So you're not just, this is not just decorative or just protecting the inside surface of the wood. This is, like the first coating on the outside, an important part of making sure the boat isn't going to leak. So don't do it too quickly. Go over it multiple times from different angles, and use an adequate amount of epoxy. Don't skimp on the epoxy here. Okay, but the big thing is go over it more than once. Go over it a number of times. Okay, there we go. That's looking pretty good. Now, we have what looks like just about the right amount of epoxy left. And we're going to do something interesting. We're going to put this right here, and we're going to coat that, because I've got clear epoxy right now. There are a few ways you could proceed now. At this point, I've got the top sticking over there so I can peel it right off. If it was, if I couldn't grab the top, it'd be pretty hard to get it off, because it'll be stuck right on. Okay, now, the reason I'm coating this now, over to the side, in the end I'm going to put it right here. But remember, this would work like this, you know, it does okay. You could just do them like this if you want, just if you're doing, you know, let's get this fast and built. But there are going to be little pockets underneath, and eventually they'll get water in them and dirt and stuff like that. So what we're going to do on this is put down a smooth bed of thickened epoxy. And this is the silica powder. This is the most hazardous part of the whole system, this silica powder. So handle it super carefully. It gets up in the air really easily. If you stir it too fast, you mix it too fast, it'll be floating all around in the air for 5 minutes. So very, very gentle. And I'll often take this outside and mix it outside, so it doesn't get in my breathing space. But if you're very careful, you'll probably be okay. Okay, now look at that. Isn't that beautiful? That's the only mixture, the only additive that will do that. Any other additive, see, it's starting to slump a little bit now. See that? But it took quite a while. And we could get it to be completely non-slump, but we don't need that because it's a thin coating. Okay, and so what we're doing is just wiping that on for the same width as the carbon fiber ribbon. And then we already have our carbon fiber ribbon saturated, so we'll just move the carbon fiber, lift the carbon fiber ribbon off and move it over into place on this nice bed of, looks like a bed of mayonnaise, doesn't it? This nice bed of epoxy, thickened epoxy. Okay, that looks pretty well. So that you see what that does is it just fills in all those grooves. So now we have a smooth surface and for that ribbon to lie on. So that's going to work really well. Okay, that should do it. Maybe a little bit more. Now, this is a balancing act. we're building a super light boat. Don't put on more epoxy than you need, but ideally you have a smooth surface with all the ribs filled in. Okay, and lay your ribbon in, pull it up just a little bit so it's as high as you want it, and that's already saturated. The ribbon's already saturated with clear, remember? Putting the thickened on top of the ribbon is fine because the ribbon is saturated, but if the ribbon weren't already saturated, the thick would not penetrate the ribbon and would not work well, would not work at all. You'd have 10,000 dry strands of carbon fiber in the inside, not stuck together. It wouldn't add any strength at all. Okay, so you see what we've done now. We just used the brush, you know, with a little bit of the thickened stuff to smooth over it. Make sure there are no bubbles underneath. You don't want any bubbles. Okay, and no sharp edges or anything. In fact, on the bottom, I'm going to take just a little teensy bit of the resin and fill in so there's kind of a little ramp up onto the carbon fiber ribbon. Okay, and that looks really nice. You can see how easy that is to work with. The ribbon is just really nice and easy to work with. Super strong too. Okay, and I have a little bit of extra. You know what I'm going to do with that? I'm going to put that right down in the bottom of the boat. Right at the V down in the bottom. You may not be able to see this, but I'll show you in a minute. Yeah, why don't you come in closer here so you can see what we're doing here. And this will wrap it up for tonight. I think you had a pretty good view of that ribbon process. Okay, and we'll give you a better view of the ribbon here. And we're working a bit in the shadow there, but maybe you can get a sense of what's happening. Okay. So we're just using this extra up. I hate to waste epoxy. It's expensive stuff and all. No point in wasting it. And we're just filling in just a very small fillet in the bottom there. And we'll get all we can out of the pot for that. We'll come back and we'll do that. You know, we'll do that as a separate step too. And this should only be done over top of the clear. The clear is low viscosity. It saturates the wood. This is West system, wood epoxy saturation technique. So the clear saturates the wood. If you start with this the thickened mixture right on bare wood, it's too thick. It won't get into the wood. It won't sink into the wood. It won't saturate. So you don't want to do this if you didn't coat down here with clear first, because the thickened stuff will stick to the wood, but it's sitting on top of the wood. It's not in the wood grain. And that's never as strong as having the clear on first, saturating the wood grain, and then adding the thickened. Okay, so there we go. And you may as well get it neat. I mean, you can't really see up here, but if it's not neat, you'll trap a lot of dirt and all sorts of stuff up here. Now the key to getting it neat is not to have too thick a mixture. You want a mixture that's creamy and smooth, that will level itself, that won't have any sharp barbs. If you have too thick a mixture, where it's sort of more like putty, every time you lift your brush, there'll be a barb of epoxy that is carried up with the brush, sticking to the brush. You'll have this sharp point. You touch it to push it down and it does the same thing again. So you want a mixture that is going to slump back into itself and be, creamy, like mayonnaise. Okay, that was easy. I don't think you'll have any trouble with that step. And as I say, normally I'd keep going and probably do a whole side at once, at least a whole side or both sides, because it only took a few minutes. But it's kind of late, and that's all I'm doing for now. So we'll see you later. You can go on and do more steps. Just remember, when we get back to the middle of the boat, let's say between 5 and 6, and between 6 and 7, and between 7 and 8. That's where you're not going to coat the plywood bottom. You can coat down onto the plywood bottom about 1/2 inch, or 1/4 inch or something like that. But don't coat the whole plywood bottom, because that's where we're going to lay in the Kevlar cloth. And you could lay that on top of a dry, hard epoxy coating, but you won't get as good a bond as when you lay it right onto the bare wood and saturate the wood and the Kevlar simultaneously. So between those 5 and 6, 6 and 7, and 7 and 8, don't coat the plywood. Okay, good. See you soon. Going great. Okay, we're back, and I was anxious to get to this all day, but now it's evening, but now I can work on it, so that's great. And got some music playing, and my faithful partner here, and everything, and now we're going to keep going. But I think, you know, we were talking about doing one side and then the other. I think I'm going to do one section on one side and then the same section on the other side. Go back and forth. And also, I'm not going to get down into the plywood. I'm just going to go down into the plywood 1/2 inch, just like I did here. I'm not going to go all the way to the seam, because in rethinking this, it's just going to be easier to do the plywood later and do the center joint down the center line later with a fillet at the same time. And it's going to be real easy then, but with these sections in place, we can't really do a continuous fillet down the middle. So we'll do it just like here. We'll do this side, then here, and we'll just go down onto the plywood about the distance that we're overlapping with carbon fiber ribbon, just over 1/2 inch, between 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch. Doesn't have to be very precise. But we won't do the rest of the plywood, and we won't do the fillet in the middle as we move back. We'll do that later. Okay, now, you may be, I heard you talking in the background there. How many of these boats has Will built? He makes it look so easy. Is this like his 150th kayak that he's built this way? Because it all seems to go so quickly and simply. But then somebody else said, well, yeah, but he keeps changing little things, you know, saying we're going to do this in this way, and then he kind of changes it a little bit. So what's the reality? Has Will built 150 of these, and this is number 151, and of course it goes really fast and easy because he's done it over and over and over? Or is this his first one? Is this the prototype? And you won't even ever get to buy this boat as a kit if it doesn't go really smoothly. Which is it? You know, is he? Well, you got to guess. And maybe I'll tell you a bit later. Is this the prototype, or is this hull number 151 that I've built them all? And of course it's simple. Well, I'll tell you in a bit. But I'm going to back and forth and see how far we get. I may cut several of the carbon fiber ribbons. That might make it a little faster if I cut carbon fiber ribbons for about 5 or 6 sections and then start to do the epoxy. The other thing that I want to point out is tonight, and notice that's an important thing. I should have showed you that. This brush was from last night, and it was stuck to the top, and without thinking, because this is what I always do, I just broke it off and you throw it away, of course. But the point is, if you left your brush like that, you can't use this mixing container again, or it's going to be sort of a nuisance, and it's hard to get the brush out. Bristles won't release. So when you finish, brush across the top or throw the brush away, but I just leave it like that because now it's not sticky. I can throw it away easily and won't get things sticky. So that's a really kind of important point, unless you drink really a lot of orange juice by the gallons, because you run out of these containers. And now tonight I've got 2 containers. So this is going to be liquid resin, clear resin, and hardener. You don't have to mix it up in this. And this one is going to be thickened resin with the silicone. So as I move along, I won't have to use the silica up
on every job as I go, on every section, so I can do clear. I want to keep them separate now. And with the silica, big point, don't forget the hardener. That's easy to do. You're mixing, you put your resin in, and you're used to mixing one thing in, you mix the silica in, and you stir it up, looks good, you spread it, it will never get hard. Never, 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 ever get hard. 10 months from now, it'll still be just gooey. So, when you're mixing the silica, don't forget the hardener. Mix your resin, add the hardener, stir those thoroughly, and then add the silica. Okay, I've seen very experienced people, when they're doing a thickened mixture, forget the hardener. And it's not good. So remember the hardener. Okay, so I think that's all you need to know. You saw how to do it last night, and you're probably having a hard time hearing over the music, but I'm enjoying it. And so we'll keep going, and you keep guessing whether this is a prototype or whether I've built 151 of them, because it looks like it's so easy to do, or I'm just making it look easy, and it's probably not as easy as it looks or something, because I've just done so many of them. So keep guessing. Okay, see you soon. Okay, so this is a fair amount of epoxy. If I make a lot of progress tonight, I'm going to have a lot of epoxy that's, you know, a small job of epoxy. You really don't notice the smell. It's not very noticeable. It's not like polyester resin at all. It really doesn't smell much. But, you know, if you coat the whole inside of the boat with epoxy, you're going to start to notice the smell. So a mask is really nice. You can't, organic filter mask. These are organic filter cartridges. Can't smell a thing with those on. And it's just like, I think it's a charcoal that absorbs the organic vapors that come off the epoxy. So the mask is really nice. And the other thing I wanted to point out was I'm going to use one of my 1-inch brushes tonight. I don't like to mix with these though. So I'm going to mix. I've got the hardener in here already. I'm going to mix with a smaller brush, one of the acid brushes with the metal handle. I'm going to mix it with that brush. And I'll use that brush a little bit, maybe when I'm putting the carbon fiber ribbon in place, or maybe when I'm spreading the silica, I'll use this brush. It's okay to use this brush spreading the silica and then go back and mix the clear with it. You won't have a whole lot of silica getting in the clear. No problem mixing it. It's just you don't want to get your clear real thick is all. So I'll use this for mixing and probably for spreading the silica. And then I'll use one of these 1-inch brushes for spreading the clear. It'll go so much faster and it'll just be a lot easier. Now on this one, I've trimmed it. The bristles were about so long, and I trimmed it. And the way to trim a brush, you have to squeeze it like that, and then you can trim right across. So I'm actually just showing you how I did it. You have to have fairly good scissors, and you can get a fairly square end. That's not perfect, but it's square enough for what we're doing. If you just try to cut it, it just kind of, without squeezing it, it really does. It's pretty hard to get a very good edge. So those are the two things I wanted to show you. And, well, since you're here, you can watch this first part. I'll move you in closer.
RMS. Je l'ai contacté cette semaine sur Facebook pour en apprendre un peu plus sur celui qu'on vient d'entendre, Zabo Balaz, qui est un artiste hongrois, et il y a beaucoup d'informations sur le web à son sujet en hongrois. Alors ça m'a un peu fâché pour préparer une émission radio. Quand même, elle m'a donné quelques informations. C'est vrai que son nom est très commun. C'est un peu, si vous voulez, le Jean-François Tremblay de la musique en Hongrie, parce qu'il y en a plusieurs artistes et musiciens qui portent son nom aussi.
Okay, mask off for a minute so I can talk. Okay, now you can hear. So again, we're brushing this in. We're not just coating it real quick. We're brushing it in really thoroughly. So it'll get in any place the epoxy from the outside didn't get into between the planks. We want to make sure the epoxy now from the inside gets through and between the planks. And so don't just do it once, just keep going over it. Go up and down, you know, get that epoxy worked in there, okay? It's
pretty liquid, so it likes to go in, but you want to help it. The other thing, you want to get right, make sure you get up onto that top plank, but be a little bit more delicate there, because you don't really want a lot of epoxy along the top edge, because you'll have to sand it off later, and it's easier just not to get it there rather than sand it off. Now I've got this coated, but I'm going to jump forwards and coat as much as I can in this front section. I'll do it again later too, but I want to make sure that these planks are held in place pretty thoroughly at this point before we pull out the strong back. So let's get down in there. We can't do too far down, so don't worry about it, but let's get down, 3 inches or so, 3.5 inches. And again, even though it's a little harder to get in there, work the epoxy in. Don't just spread it on the surface, work it in a little bit. Okay, you can see how fast and easy it is with this bigger brush. That would have taken twice as long with the thin brush. So I like these bigger brushes for this, where you're coating more area. And another thing, these brushes have tan bristles. You're probably not going to see them in the epoxy, which is great, instead of the black bristles. Although you can pull them out if you want to, if it bothers you. Okay, so we have this pretty well coated on both sides up in here. And we don't have to worry about going all the way down, we'll get that later. We're still not going to be ready to pull off this tape though on the bow, not until we've had this section out and full access to epoxying everything down in there and getting a beautiful fillet up in the bow that'll be super strong for when you run into the dock or whatever you're going to hit. Okay, so that's coated. Let's do the next section back at the same time. We'll get this one, because we still have a fair amount of clear. We mixed up 5 marks of clear. I thought that would be a good number. Based on last night, one section with the silica, the thickened part was 3 marks, and that was just right. So I thought 5 marks might be a good starting point. If it's really, really a hot day where you're working, you better work really, really fast, or just mix up 3 marks might be smarter. It's about 65, I would guess, in my shop now, and so I got tons of time. I could even take a phone call, but that's never a good idea. I wouldn't ever take a phone call if you got epoxy mixed up with hardener in your pot. The other thing is, if it's really warm and you're worried about the epoxy going off, get it out of your pot as fast as possible, because sitting in the pot when you've got a massive epoxy in the pot, the chemical reaction of the epoxy starting to set off heats up the epoxy, and that heat creates a faster reaction, and you get this chain reaction where it keeps speeding itself up, and on a hot day you can just have it set off hard in your pot within about 1.5 minutes once it starts heating itself up. But when it's out of the pot, it's more exposed to air temperature. It doesn't have a large mass of epoxy going off with the chemical reaction, and it'll take a great deal longer to set off. It won't go off super fast unless it's incredibly hot. So get it out of your pot fast if it's hot, and then work at spreading it. But don't leave it in your pot and try to be really meticulous, because it's going to go right off in your pot if it's warm. Okay, looking good. We got those 2 sections done, and we're a little bit late actually. I think we'll be okay, but I think I'd recommend that you mix 6 up, because I'm a little shy of resin on this carbon fiber strip to saturate it. And it's easier if you have excess resin. I'm going to have to mix some more, in fact. I probably have enough. It's just easier if you have more. And I definitely don't have enough for the next one. So let's mix some more. I tell you what I'll do. I'm going to mix my pre-thickened. I mixed enough resin for the thickened mixture, but before I add the silica, I'm going to saturate my carbon fiber ribbons. And then next time, to do 2 sections, I'm going to mix up 6 large marks of clear. But this time I'll just steal some from the silica mixture. Okay, and again, if it's warm, don't mix big batches, especially with the silica, because you're not going to need much of that. It's just for that real thin bed underneath the carbon fiber. So if you mix a whole lot of, if you mix too much of the resin for the silica mixture, you're going to lose it. Okay, for the silica, let's just do, now it's cool in here. I'm going to do 2 large marks, and that should be fine. There's 1 large mark, and we'll get the other one here. We get the hardener. And don't skimp on the hardener, because if you're too short of hardener, it's not going to set off. It's not like polyester resin though. You can't just you can't decide how much hardener you're going to add based on how fast you want it to go off. It doesn't work that way. This is a bonding process. The molecules of the hardener mesh and bond with the molecules of the resin, and if you have extra molecules of hardener, they don't have anything to bond to. They're just floating around. It'll still get hard, but it's not going to be as strong because you want everything bonded together. Molecule of resin, hardener bonded with a molecule of resin, and that linked together. So that's the best. Don't ever go way heavy on the hardener thinking you just make it set off faster. It won't set off faster, and it just won't be as strong. So, but don't be short of the hardener either. I'd rather have a little bit of extra hardener, like 5 or 10% extra hardener, than 5 or 10% short of hardener. Okay, now we've got a nice amount of liquid resin to coat the carbon fiber, and it's coating much more easily. I don't know if you can see that. Put it on the other side, maybe you can see better here. So it's coating very nicely now. It's much easier this way. Okay, and I really like this smaller brush for coating the carbon fiber. I tried the bigger brush there, but I didn't like that. It wasn't as easy for me. Okay, and making this easy is the key to it being fun. Okay, and we'll saturate this carbon fiber ribbon. Okay. Now remember, we're just coating these. We're not leaving them here. This isn't where they belong. I'm going to put them right in the middle of the section. But it's easiest to coat it first, and then we'll lay our bed of silica, and then we'll move this over into that bed. Okay, now, I probably have about 1.5 marks here, a little more than 1. And let's, we never give you measurements for the silica. The reason is it varies a little bit, but I can show you what I'm putting in. For 1.5 marks, I'm putting in just a little more than half a spoonful to start with. Very delicate because my mask is not on right now. I don't want the stuff floating around. I'm trying to talk. And so mix very slowly at first, and then when it's when it's not powdery, is when it gets into the resin a little bit, you can mix more aggressively. Okay, let's take a look at that. Let's see how that is. You're right above me so you can't see. That dripped just a teensy bit easier than I think. There, it's dripping. So I don't want it to run down the side because the carbon fiber ribbon will be on top of it. That'll keep it from running. I think I'd rather have it more liquid on the liquid side than on too pasty or thicker side. So I just added a very little bit more of the silica powder, the white powder. Maybe a quarter of the spoon, level spoonful. Let's see what that does. Okay, now, that looks just a little thicker. Still dripping, but it's a little thicker. Let's brush that on, see if we like it. We can brush it off and add more silica if we want to. Now there's a bump right here. Right where I was going to put my carbon fiber ribbon. I've got a bump of resin that dripped through from the outside. So let's not go right over that bump because it really won't work very well. Let's move forwards and put it beside the bump. Don't care about the bump, except don't want it under the carbon fiber ribbon because the carbon fiber ribbon won't conform to the bump. It's just a little too sudden a bump of resin there. And I don't want to have to sand that bump off. I mean, you could do that. Be a little awkward at this stage, but you could do it before you get everything all sticky. However, I didn't, and there's no harm in having the bump there, just so you don't have to put your carbon fiber ribbon right on it. Okay, so just a real nice bed, not super thick though. This is an ultralight boat. You don't want to add a whole lot of unnecessary weight when it's really not going to add any strength. So that looks about right there. Let's lay the ribbon in. Ooh, sticky. And pat it down. There. Now that's just where I want it. It's a little more than halfway up the top plank, and it's down over the joint between the planking and the plywood, about ½ an inch, a little more than ½ an inch, probably 5/8 of an inch in this case. And I'm just going to brush a little more on. I'm going to make sure that there's no gaps along the edge. Okay, and this is the pre-thickened. Got a little more than I want there, so I'll take that off. And part of the brushing is you just sort of massaging it into place. And notice all the brushing is lined up with the ribbons. It's a mess if you start to brush sideways and fray the ribbons. Once those filaments get loose, it's pretty hard to get them back lying in place neatly. Okay, I'm going to just put a little bit at the very bottom so I don't have a sharp edge there that'll catch dirt or anything. I want a little ramp there going up onto that. Okay, very nice. Up a little bit more at the top actually. It's pulling away just a little bit at the top. Now that's good to have that happen on this one. That's easy to fix. I'll just work a little bit of silica in behind there. Okay, see like that. Hope you can see that. Okay, that took care of it, easy as could be. One of the things with epoxy work that sometimes baffles me is people will look at their work really carefully after it's set up. Don't look at it too carefully after it's set up. Look at it really carefully before it's set up at this stage when you can do something about it. If you're going to notice something after it's set up, try to notice it now. So, and that's true of me too. Sometimes I'll see something and I'll think, oh darn it, why didn't I see that while I was doing it instead of afterwards after it's all set up and I can't fix it, or it's harder to fix. Okay, so look at the details now. And get it. Doesn't have to be incredibly well done actually, it's super strong stuff, but get it as good as you want it now, and then when you look at it later you'll say, wow, didn't I do a nice job. Okay, so just a thin bed, and I've got a fair amount of extra silica mixture here, which is fine, probably enough for at least one more ribbon. So that was you know, so one large mark probably do okay. And if it's warm, that's what I'd recommend. But if it's cool, like in my shop here, now I got this glove sticky. I don't know of any way around that, because when you grab the carbon fiber, I don't know how to get that off without touching it. So I'm gonna have to clean that glove off with paper towel in a minute here. Oh, you can't see what I'm doing now, can you? Okay, let's see if that'll work. So I've got the second bed of resin. And then I've got my carbon fiber strip, which I pulled off where it was stuck to the boat there. And I'm going to lay that in. It's easier to pull it up into place than it is to push it down. So start with it down a little bit farther than you want it and pull it up. Slide it up. Now I'm going to clean off my glove, because if I grab my brush now, then my brush is going to be sticky. Next time then I'll touch something else and that'll be sticky, and pretty soon it's a mess. If you can't get your glove fairly clean here, or really clean, see, I don't mess around with this. I get it really clean. If you can't get it really clean, just grab another glove. It's the only way to work with epoxy. Start getting things, oops, my container's sticky now. Because actually, after touching that other ribbon is where I forgot to wipe off my gloves. Now I have to wipe off my container, or else I'll just keep spreading it around. And now I have to wipe off my gloves again. So you can see how just being super careful. And I'm wiping off the brush now, because it must have been a little sticky too. Okay, might have been. Now I'm going to brush out where that carbon fiber was sitting, there, get that smooth. Now I'm going to start to work on the carbon fiber and make sure it's not got any gaps underneath it, no bubbles or anything. It's looking good. Oh, a bit of a bubble right there. Let's work that out. Okay, looks good. Okay, and make sure the top isn't gapping, gaping. Okay, just a little bit here. Nice, okay. There we go. Good enough. When you get it right, just leave it alone. You just, if you keep working with stuff, it doesn't get better, because the epoxy gets thicker and it's harder to work with. So if you keep working with it too long, you're just going to find it's getting worse and worse. So just get it good enough and leave it alone. There we go. Okay. Well, that went quick. We got 3 sections done, and it's looking great. So I'll let you go now. And when we've got this done, or if I think of something in the meantime, we'll talk to you shortly. Okay. Very exciting. Pretty amazing stuff. Amazing materials we have to work with these days. It's just phenomenal. And that's why we can make this boat as light as it's going to be, and yet super strong. Okay, bye now. Okay, here we are again with another detail. A lot of details. We get carbon fiber from different sources, and it comes to us sometimes looking slightly different. And this particular carbon fiber that we've got here may be like yours. Now, first of all, see, it does have a plastic backing on it. See the plastic backing? You've got to get that off. It won't work at all if you have that plastic. See, it's just the clear plastic on it. Got to get that off. This also has the scrim is quite wide on this particular carbon fiber. It's basically the same material, but I don't like that wide scrim, so I like to trim that off. I think it's easier to work with and everything, so just trim that off. You know, it doesn't have to be right to the edge of the carbon fiber, but you know, about 1/16 of an inch away from the carbon fiber, and then you won't have all that floating around everywhere. Okay, that looks better. A little bit more here. Don't pull the ribbon apart though. Okay. A little bit of that extra won't make any difference, but no need to have a whole lot of it. So another thought, once you measure, I'm not going to tell you a measurement on this because there may be a little variation if you had one extra plank or something. But once you measure one of these carbon fiber ribbons, essentially they're all going to be the same. So you can just cut them all. all at once based on your first one, because you have the same width of planking all the way down. Okay, might change a little bit at the back end, but shouldn't really change that significantly. So you might cut about half of them all, do a few sections, make sure you like the length you're using, and then cut about half of them, and then do those, and then cut the rest of them. Okay, just wanted to add those few points there for you. Okay, look at that, looking good. Now that's super strong. The carbon fiber is terrific. And bedded in the resin like that, it's great. And there's our life jacket just getting ready here. Okay, now there's three things I want to tell you. See if I can remember all three. Okay, and here, I can do a selfie here. Maybe I'll get over on this other side. Now, well, this isn't one of the three things, but look, so I've done about a little more than half the boat, 6 sections. And that took about an hour or so. It was quite quick, wasn't rushing at all. And I have 5 sections left to go, but I'm hungry, so I'm going to stop and get some food and then see where we're at. Okay, but there are 3 things I wanted to tell you. Okay, so let's I can do a little selfie, see how that works, so you can hear me better and see me better. 3 things, remember. The first is, notice when I'm working, here, those are all clear windows across the top, not windows exactly, but clear fiberglass, and it's quite a lot of light comes in when it's daylight. You can see they're quite dark. Okay, and yes, it's past dinner time, and why am I working at night? Why? You haven't seen me out here in the morning, especially not with any of the big epoxy jobs coating the wood. Now, the reason for that is if you're working before the warmest part of the day, the wood is cool from the previous night. Doesn't matter how cool. If it's cooler and then warming up, even if it's just a few degrees, the wood has a lot of air held in the cells of the wood. And all through the warming part of the day, as it warms up, that air is expanding and coming out of the wood, and your epoxy is going to bubble endlessly. It won't stop. It just keeps bubbling until it finally sets off with a lot of bubbles in it. Even if you keep brushing over it, that's the best thing you can do, is keep brushing over it. But even if you keep brushing over it, you're going to find that you've got a whole lot of bubbles, some bigger ones, some just minute ones, but it's going to be rough and bubbly, sort of like a 50 grit sandpaper if you run your hand over it, because of all the bubbles. So bubbles are bad. They're not good. It's not fun to have to sand them off, and you can leave them, but it's better not to have bubbles. So the way we avoid bubbles is we wait till the wood and the air temperature and the wood temperature are cooling down, and then it's actually ideal, because at that point the air in the wood is contracting as it gets cooler and pulling in, and it's actually sucking the resin right into the wood. So you get terrific bonding then, because the resin goes way deep into the wood because it's being pulled in. So anytime after the warmest part of the day, it doesn't have to be after dinner time or after dinner, anytime after the warmest part of the day, but make sure the boat has gotten up to its warmest temperature and now is starting to cool down. Okay, that should be clear. Now, the other 2 things. Okay, you're working with, you're putting the bed of thickened resin on the wood underneath the carbon fiber ribbon. Well, you might be able to use some of that thickened resin for filling in anywhere. Maybe you have a butt joint where 2 planks come together that's not absolutely tight. That's a great place to use the thickened resin with the silica in it to fill in there while you're at it. We can come back and do that later too, but any place you see where there's a crack that's bigger and if it's a significant crack between two planks, that doesn't matter. But the clear resin may not have filled it in, because if you have a big gap, the clear resin will tend to run right through and not fill it. So any place you think you might have gaps or butt joints that aren't tight, use that pre-thickened and smear it right in there and fill that gap up. Okay, and then the last thing, the most important thing about working with epoxy. Working with epoxy is great. And we've got it done. Okay, got all those on, really nice. And I'm hungry, and I want to go in and have some food. Finished for the night? Not even close. The most important part of working with epoxy hasn't happened yet, okay? So, what is the most important part of working with epoxy? And where more people go wrong than with any other part. Okay, well, look right there. In fact, lucky I didn't get distracted by talking to you. Look at that. Do you see what I'm seeing? That ribbon has skidded down just a little bit. It's no longer up over that top plank joint. And I've taken my gloves off, but I think I can just do this. Yeah. This may be another learning experience. I think I can do it without getting sticky. Every time I think that, I end up getting sticky. And I don't like to get epoxy on my hands because it's such useful stuff. I do not want to develop a reaction to it. So I'm very careful with it. Okay. And I'm going to straighten that out a little bit too. Okay, you can see I did that. If you're working at a really hot temperature, you probably can't come back this much later and do it, because I did that one 20 minutes ago or so. And here, this one, whoa, oh, hold on, you're going upside down. Let's get this one up. I'm not sure why these two skidded. I've had to move them up about 3 or 4 times now. And this one has a bit of a gap at the top that I keep wanting to fill with some of the pre-thickened, some of the thickened resin there. And so now the resin's getting a little stiffer. Well, look, here's some, I don't know if you can see all this. Oh, there we go. Here's some resin down here. It's just running down. I don't need it down there. You know, it's not, the plywood's plenty strong. I want it coated, but I don't want a heavy run of a resin going down on it. And maybe I can use that over here. Fill in a bit of a gap there. Not very much, but a little bit of a gap there. Now these front ones didn't skid. Now that's what epoxy does. It tricks you. It intentionally does that. They're all the same, right? And I did the first 6, and they didn't skid at all. And then, proceeding with all confidence that that wasn't an issue, the next 2 did skid. So you can't trust that stuff. It's slippery stuff. And these are skidding just a little bit too. I think it may be just a slight difference between the front, which slopes in more, and back in here, which is almost vertical at the top. So these are tending to skid just a little bit. So just keep urging them up. Okay, so that's the point I want to make, that when you finish, you're not done. You think you're done, but you're not done. The most important part is to check after 5 minutes, check after 10 minutes, and check after 30 minutes. When the epoxy is finally set up so you can touch it and not get real sticky, it's not going to move after that. You don't have to keep checking it for hours or anything. But you'll be amazed how many times I've heard from people that say, well, I got it all glued up and then I went off to town, or I went inside and forgot about it. And when I came back, it had skidded. Something had slid out of place. And now it's set up hard, of course. And that's something you can avoid easily by remembering to check it. So the most important part of epoxy work is going back and checking again, and checking a third time, continuing to check until the epoxy is set up enough that nothing can move. So that's the part that people forget or don't know about, one or the other. So the most important part of epoxy work, because really it is slippery stuff and it slides easily. So if you're clamping something or laying something up like this, go back and check. If I hadn't checked, I wouldn't have caught this sort of sag of epoxy down here that went down onto the boat, onto the bottom. A lot more, not a big problem. Here's some more too. See how much there is there? Sure, there's some place I can use that it'll do something useful. But down here, although it's not a problem, it's just extra weight. It doesn't help any. Here's a bubble. See the? Oh, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, maybe you can. Get those bubbles out. Don't. Just because it didn't bubble right away doesn't mean it's not going to bubble right as soon as you turn your back. It's sneaky stuff. Very sneaky. Don't trust it for a minute. Not until it's set up. Then you can trust it. Absolutely. But not until it's set up. And it doesn't hurt to go back and work over it. And use that epoxy that sags down someplace useful. Find a crack that needs filling. There's a bubble again. Okay? So until it's set up, you're not through, really. Okay, this side is pretty close to set up over here, but I'm still able to brush out a bubble. Okay, so I think that wraps it up. Did we get it all? All three things. One is work on your boat while the wood is cooling down. If you're doing coating, surface coating, use the pre-thickened or the thickened resin that you have to fill in any gaps at this point, between butt joints or cracks in between planks that are bigger than the liquid resin wants to hang in to. And third, keep checking your work. Check it 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, 20 minutes later, and half an hour later. 4 times is even better than 3. So those are the things that are critical. That's by experience. After you've had things move enough times, finally you learn. You think, oh, that's perfect, that can't move. And then it does move. When that happens enough times, finally you get wise to it and catch on, and then you start checking your work. So let's start checking it now, and you'll be a much happier builder. Okay, here's a butt joint. Let's see if, I don't know if you can see that. It's hard to know what detail is going to show up. But there's a butt joint that I think is pretty full, but I'm going to go right over it. Oh, here, this one's not full. I can see that. I'm going to steal some resin from over here and fill that right in. There we go. Okay, see how easy that is. It's just a matter of seeing it and doing it. And it's, although we can fill the butt joints later, epoxy builds huge, long strands of molecules. The molecules are immense. It's all bonded together. And that's the strongest. When it's all bonded, it all sets up together and creates these long chains of molecules that are bonded together. Epoxy sticks very well to itself, much better than polyester resin or something. Polyester doesn't stick very well to things. But epoxy sticks very well to things, even if you put it on top of epoxy that's already set off. But you don't have those long links of chains of molecules bonded together in a chemical way. It's just surface, sticking to the surface. So anything you can do while the epoxy is still wet and setting up is going to be the strongest approach, because the epoxy isn't bonding to the epoxy, another surface of epoxy. It's actually one and the same as the other surface. The two surfaces are linked. All the molecules are linked. Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything more, but you can see how long I'm taking. It's probably a little tedious for you, and I apologize for that. But I really want to make this point of checking and continuing to check. Don't even look at it after it's set up. Don't. That's not the time to look at it. Look at it now while it's before it's set up, and look at it really carefully now and see what you might be able to fix, rather than look at it when it's all hard and dry and you say, oh my gosh, I didn't notice that. And now you can still fix it, but it's not nearly as easy or as good a way to do it. Okay, I'll leave you alone now and I'll go get some food. Bye now. Okay, we're back. It's always a little awkward trying to be zoomed in on what we're working on as much as possible and still to be in the picture myself. But I think you've seen enough of me probably and would rather see what we're doing. So sometimes you may see my lips moving and not be able to see the rest of my face, and maybe that's okay, just so you can hear and see the work we're doing. So I think that's going to be the case here. I want to zoom in enough you can see the work, and I don't want to have to be doing it while I'm pushing my head upside down looking at the camera, because I'm not that good. I'm good at what I'm doing, but it's a little hard to work and do good work without looking at it. So please excuse my being cut off and only seeing part of me, but you'll see my hands. That's the important part. Okay, now we're doing the joints for the plywood. We're going to reinforce those with these little pieces of plywood sitting glued down on top of that joint. Now you see these pieces aren't as long as the joint is, and that's intentional. We want to have a channel down the middle. There'll be a fillet down the middle, of course, of thickened epoxy, but we want to have a channel down the middle for water to run down, and we want to have a channel down along the edge, again, for water to run down when we're finished paddling and we're draining the kayak out. We don't want water to get trapped back in the back section, even just a small amount trapped behind these blocks, which might be the case if we ran these blocks all the way across. So they're about 1/2 inch from the center line and about 1/2 inch from the planking here. Okay, now on this one I've already done a little work cleaning it up. Now it's time to clean this one up a little bit. First thing is, it's kind of nice to have the outer edge parallel to the joint or parallel to the planking. So I've shaped that, and I've done that on both of them. Now the other thing is, if we leave these angles real sharp, epoxy doesn't really have the ability to cling to a perfectly sharp angle. Sorry about that. Epoxy doesn't really have the ability to cling to a really sharp angle like this. Also, anything that touches that angle will cut right through the epoxy. So the bottom angles can be sharp because they're protected by the bottom, by being up against the bottom plywood. And so we don't want to sand these bottom edges, but let's ease these top edges. I don't want to really get standing dust into the boat. I'm going to ease these top edges, and I'm going to ease the corners. So the epoxy will be able to stick on all those surfaces and protect the piece. You can do it over here. I think maybe you can see this. Okay. And what we're going to be doing is coating with clear both the bottom of these pieces and the bottom of the boat, where they'll sit down on top of the bottom piece. And then we're going to be mixing some silica in for, not a lumpy, not a stiff pre-thicken, but just like we were doing with the bed for the carbon fiber ribbons. We'll be doing a bed for these and lay them down into that bed. If your bottom pieces are really smoothly aligned, I can feel a teensy ridge there, but it's very small. If these bottom pieces are smoothly aligned with each other, you don't really need a very thick bed of epoxy, of the thickened epoxy. It can be pretty thin. If there's a bigger ridge here between this piece and this piece, then you'd need to give it a thicker bed of epoxy to level that out. The biggest thing is you don't want any voids. You don't want any air space underneath these pieces that you're gluing on. Because you get water trapped in there later or something, and also it won't be as strong. Okay, so that looks nice. Both these pieces now have rounded edges and smooth. Let's blow some of the dust out. Okay. And this piece here. And this piece is here. Okay, and I think if we start with mixing up 4 clear, then 4 large marks of clear with hardener, 4 small marks of hardener, and coat everything with that. Then we'll have some extra of that mixture to add the silica to for a pre-thickened, and we'll see how we come out. Okay, and I have everything I need. I'm very organized today. I have my paper towels, I have my gloves, I have a brush, trimmed brush, half the bristles cut off, squeezing it and then clipping it. And I have all my epoxy supplies here right by my side. So this is a very fast, this is one of the, well, like 15-minute jobs. And I'm not as concerned. It's kind of a cool day. It is morning, but it's kind of a cool day. It's overcast, and if anything, it may be getting cooler today rather than warmer. It doesn't look like it's ever going to warm up, so I'm not really worried about bubbling. Also, it's not a coating. You know, I'm gluing things down. You wouldn't want a huge temperature increase because you might get some bubbles underneath it, but when you're gluing things together, it's less of an issue than when you're coating. Okay, so let's go. We'll do 4 large marks of epoxy and 4 small marks of hardener. Oh, you know, one note, I don't know if I mentioned this, but these notes, do not tilt ever. Even when the lid's on tight, if you tip it, you get epoxy up on the lid, underneath the surface of the lid. Then it, just because of its sort of capillary action, it works its way out to the edge of the lid. And then when you put the lid on, it comes squeezing out down the sides, under the threads. And then when you go to pick up your epoxy container next time, the epoxy container is sticky. Now, even though I'm so careful, there's still just a very light amount of epoxy on that upper edge. And I'm going to wipe that right off, because one of the things that really aggravates me is if I pick up one of these epoxy containers just to move it or put it away, and it's all sticky, I get it on my hands, and then I have to clean my hands off, and it's just so much easier to keep it really clean. So anytime you see that you might have some epoxy on that upper edge, or in the threads, wipe it off, because it'll end up getting on you. And there's just a teensy bit on here, so I'm going to wipe this too. Okay, and this is what makes epoxy fun and easy to work with, is being very neat with it. Because it doesn't come off of things, it's sticky. Okay. That looks good. And when you don't put this towel someplace you're going to use it again, because you pick it up and you get sticky right away from the towel. So you just have to use multiple paper towels. This one's done. It's in the trash. Okay. Now, 4 large marks of resin. Here we go. I may be off camera, so you have to just be patient here. And so there we are, 4 large marks of resin. Here, I'll do it in here. That way you can see it. All the exciting action here at Tippecanoe taking place right in front of the camera. Okay, and 4 small marks of hardener. And I pulled up a little more than I needed and then pushed out a little bit, and that's what I usually do. 4 small marks of hardener, and make sure there are no bubbles. Make sure you haven't sucked bubbles up into your syringe, because that'll throw off your ratio. Okay, and lids back on the containers. Let's check inside this lid. That looks pretty clean still, so I don't have to clean that one off. Okay, and mixing. Remember, with epoxy, the goal is, the approach is to mix it until you are absolutely certain it's mixed thoroughly, and then mix for another minute. If it's really a hot climate and you're mixing up a large batch, you might want to cut that extra mixing time to half a minute, so you don't have it all set off hard in your pot. Oh, and one note that I hadn't mentioned, in fact I'll get in the camera here for this. This is important. It's a lot easier to do epoxy work when you're not in direct sunlight. The UV rays start activating that epoxy and getting all those molecules vibrating, and it's not just the heat of the sun, it's also the activation of the UV rays that make the epoxy set off super fast. We were doing a family boat building at the Mystic, Connecticut Wooden Boat Show with 8 families building our T-37 racing sloops, our model sailboats, radio controlled model sailboats. They're so popular. And it was hot. It was like 90 degrees, and some of the work where we had the boats set up was in under shade in a tent, but some was outside in the sunlight where there wasn't enough room in the tent. And I tell you, it was challenging for me. I've done a lot of epoxy work. I had to work as fast as I could to help the different families on some of the steps, gluing in the keel especially. We had like 5 minutes to work with that epoxy. It was setting off so fast, and we had to get everything in perfect place in 5 minutes and then leave it alone because it was hard. And so that was impressive. And we did have a few pots of resin that somebody had been mixed up and not used quite quickly enough, and bang, they went off. Super hot. You can't touch the container, it's so hot, and it's smoking. And so we did lose a few batches of resin that had been mixed up, small batches. And so sunlight is not helpful. Try to avoid working in direct sunlight. Okay, so now we've got this. I think I can just kind of guess how wide I need to go on this. If I go a little extra wide, that's okay. And I'm going to go ahead and go out to the planking because I want to make sure that this joint really gets filled up with epoxy all the way out and then all the way to the center. And I'm going to do the center line too here a little bit. Because once these pieces are in place, it may just be a little harder to get to that and make sure everything's filled in. Okay. And again, it's not just brush it on and leave it. You're kind of working. Remember, this joint down here doesn't have any epoxy in it. The epoxy will sort of go in and then sink in a little bit, and then you add some more and brush it in a little bit more and brush it in a little bit more. It's not just a one step. You just keep doing it. Do back and forth across it, up and down. You want to make sure that joint is full and stays full. Okay? So that looks good on that side. Now I'm going to set this, as I go, set this in place here. You don't want to have it all nicely shaped and everything and then end up gluing it in upside down or backwards. Okay. You notice I'm coating both sides of this first before I coat these pieces. These pieces, a one-step coating would probably work pretty well. But these, I want to keep going over this joint because I want that epoxy to go all the way down through that joint, right down to the tape on the other side. Remember, we taped the joint with blue masking tape on the other side temporarily. And you can work it a little bit. If these pieces work up and down against each other just a little bit, that'll help the epoxy work its way down as well. And so we're going to coat these really thoroughly, and then we'll coat the pieces we're gluing on, and then we'll come back and coat these joints on the bottom a second time as well to make sure everything is filled with epoxy. Okay, just keep going over that joint. Load it up. You want epoxy sitting on top of that joint, so there's something for the joint to pull from, so it can pull the epoxy in. If it pulls the epoxy in, there's nothing there anymore. You can't get any more epoxy, and it won't fill. Okay, that looks pretty good. You can get reflections too and see, is there solid epoxy on that joint, or is it kind of a crack where the joint is? Okay, now let's get these coated. And this one is going, how's it going? Going like this, okay? Yeah, just like that. So this is the side that we want to coat here. We can coat the top later on, but I want to coat the edges now with the clear. Because we're going to get some thickened up against those edges, and the clear will soak into that end grain and edge grain a lot better and protect it better. Okay, it looks like we will have lots of epoxy for this, at least so far. You don't want to miss any place. You don't want water. You don't want water to get into your wood grain later on. You want to make sure that everything is thoroughly coated. That's the key with epoxy. You're locking in a low moisture content, because moisture doesn't permeate through the epoxy. So if you start with a low moisture content in the wood, you lock that in. And that's what you want. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Don't want to get my gloves too sticky. And let's see, I need a place to put this, so let's just do this. Okay, and then this piece, flip it over. If you end up coating the wrong side of this, that's okay, you just coat both sides, but it's going to be a little bit easier to work with one side uncoated. In fact, we could do a bit of a trick here, which would be probably a good idea. 1 minute. Okay, so let's make a little teensy handle here, a little bit of a handle with blue tape. That might keep us from getting as much epoxy on our fingers. Okay, so finding the top side, that's the top side, sticking the tape on, that'll give us a way to hold the piece. Okay, just like that, a little handle. You can see that okay? There. Okay, now I'll hold it this way until I need that handle, and then I'll use that. Coating the edge grain first, I might come back and coat that if it looks like it's soaking in a lot, and then coating the bottom. And then remember, we're going to go back and coat that joint. I can see where that joint's, the epoxy soaked right through. In fact, you can do a little bit right now. Just going back over that epoxy, over that joint where the epoxy has soaked in entirely, which is what we want. We want the epoxy to go on in. Okay, that looks good. That's the great thing about the West system epoxy. It's very low viscosity. It was specifically developed to be very low viscosity, so it can penetrate wood grain and penetrate thin joints like this and everything. And that's why it's so good to work with. Best epoxy on the market as far as my opinion. And I built, tell me if I'm repeating myself, but I built a 24-foot boat almost 40 years ago now, and it was a West System epoxy boat, laminated Western red cedar, and it's still in perfect shape after 40 years and crossing the Atlantic Ocean, sailing all through the Mediterranean, and then ending up on the west coast out here. That boat is still in absolutely perfect shape. So you can expect your kayak to last at least 40 years and still be in perfect shape with a little care. Okay, that looks good. And now I'm just going to lay that down there for a minute. And you think, well, why not just leave that there? Isn't that done? Well, it's always best when you're gluing things. So I'm making a little handle for my other one. Would have been good to do it before I got the epoxy on it, but that's okay. There we go. Okay. And paper towels, because I got my fingers sticky. So with paper towels, it's a little hard to wipe off gloves, but it works okay. A lot better than leaving them sticky. Okay, so even though you have gloves on, don't get your gloves sticky. That's not the idea of the gloves. The gloves is just to, gloves should stay as clean as if you were working with your hands without a glove. Anytime you get your gloves sticky, clean it off right away. Okay, and you can tell if your gloves are sticky. You know, keep checking, because if you start touching, if you don't realize they're sticky and you start touching stuff, then everything gets sticky. You have to wipe everything off. Okay, now is our chance to recoat this joint here and work that epoxy in nicely. And we're getting really good saturation, penetration in here. Okay, that looks good. Let's get this side here. So you're asking why not just leave this in place? Well, here's it's a little hard to get off actually there. Why not just leave it in place? Isn't it going to be glued down? Well, the trouble is twofold. Any place there's a little bit, the clear is fairly thin stuff, fairly thin coating, and any place, gee, it really wants to stay on there. There we go. Okay, well it does actually look like it was pretty good, but here, it wasn't touching right there. The thin is fairly clear coating, so if there's any irregularity in the surface, the thin will, where it's perfectly flat and touching really closely, the thin would work fine. But if there's any irregularity in the surface, in that area, you'll have a void. And you don't want any voids with epoxy work. You want solid epoxy, no air spaces. And then the other aspect of it is, depending on the surfaces and the type of wood and everything, and the grain pattern of the wood, wood is fairly absorptive, like a sponge sort of. And if you coat it with clear, and the wood absorbs all the clear, you're going to be left with a fairly dry joint, again with voids, because all the epoxy that you thought was gluing stuff together has soaked into the wood and isn't in the joint anymore. So that's why we almost always, unless we know it's an absolutely perfect joint and that the wood is fairly hard, dense wood, we almost always want to add in an additive to thicken the resin, because that additive holds the resin in the joint, won't let that resin that you're using to glue the two pieces together, won't let it soak down into the joint. Okay, so let's see. I'm a little stuck with a place to put this, so I'll put it out of the camera. You don't need to see it. Oops, not there. Put it on this. Okay. Set down there. Okay. Now, silica. Extreme caution with the silica. You do not want to breathe this. It's powdered glass. Colloidal silica. You can have colloidal gold too. That would be an interesting additive. I wonder how that would work. Colloidal just means very fine powder. You know, such fine particles that it is the finest dust. Okay, now, in this thickened mixture, we don't want it to be very thick. We don't want it to be lumpy. We don't want it to hold, if it's got lumps, you know, and thick, we push it down, it might be, the mixture itself might hold the two pieces apart and create voids. So this is kind of runny. If you watch there, it's dripping now. Okay, so it doesn't drip instantly, but it drips. That looks just right. Okay, and we don't really need a whole lot of this, because you saw how when it was sitting there, it was almost, you know, a perfect fit. Didn't really want to lift up. Want to have more of this pre-thickened towards the middle. with the idea that it'll squeeze out towards the sides when you push the piece down. But coat the whole area. We're going to put this piece in place, and then we can use any excess that squeezes out on the other side as well. Okay, and I'm going to go right across the middle with this pre-thickened, because I want this to really bond, you know, with the chemical bond down here in the center. Okay, and I think this was the piece on this side. Yes, that looks good. And not to confuse which piece is which. And now, that's what you want. When you glue things with epoxy, you want resin to be squeezing out everywhere, all around. Okay, we're going to put a little weight on that in a minute and see if that holds it down in place. Okay, actually I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of excess on that side. It looks like we should have enough here. If you need more resin, mix more resin. Don't try to glue things together with inadequate amounts of resin, because that guarantees you'll end up with voids. Okay, let's see about weights. We've got a couple of things that work just right. Anything to push that down a little bit would be good. Okay, now the thing about weights is, if you have a weight that goes out over the sides of what you're working on, it makes it hard to clean off. And as I thought, when we weight these, they're going to want to slide. Okay, so what we're going to do, they're going to want to slide together. So what we're going to do is place one weight across the middle, and we'll see how this works. Oh, still sliding. Okay, see what slippery stuff it is. That looks pretty good, but I have to keep the boat balanced now. So for the next half-hour video, you're going to see the boat, just me holding it and balancing it. No, I'll wedge something underneath. I think that would be a better solution. Okay, tape on one side, standing block on the other. Okay, now, do we have enough resin in there? Is it squeezing out everywhere, all along the edge? Any place it's not squeezing out along the edge, you don't have enough resin. We're a little bit light on this side. I was a little worried about this side. I think we're close. No, there it comes out a little bit now. Okay, now I'm seeing it all along this edge. I think, yeah, and I'm seeing it all along this edge. Good light is important here. Then I have a little excess along here. No point in having excess resin. Excess resin just is excess weight. I'm going to add it along this side because I kind of like to have a little bit of a fillet along the edges. Okay, a little bit out here. And this is where it really counts, okay? This is the time you did it, you did the job, you got it glued. Well, no, you're not finished. This is the time that really counts. Here's a bubble right here. Let's get that bubble out, okay? And we do have it all along here. We're double checking everything. We have resin all along this side. I'm pretty sure we'll have resin. I can't see underneath this weight, which I don't like that. I don't like not being able to see, but I did need to put that weight across, bridging it, so they wouldn't both skid together, because otherwise they both end up touching in the middle. And that weight is preventing that. But I'm pretty sure I'll have resin at the bottom, because the resin's tendency is to move. Okay, here we are. Let's have a little tour. We have the whole inside coated, and all the carbon fiber ribbons in place, and everything looking very, very clean and neat. All the ribbons are up where they belong, nothing's slid down, and so we're looking good. Now just one reminder, I think we talked about this before. In the joint between the bottom plank and the plywood, right in there, make sure you keep going over that. That joint is going to absorb a lot more resin than any of the joints between the planks themselves, because the edge grain, the resin will get down between the plank and the edge grain of the plywood, and the edge grain of the plywood is going to soak up a lot more resin, because that middle ply of the plywood, the grain is running crustwise on that middle ply, running out like this, and so look at between the fingers, that's where all that resin is going to get soaked in. And that's great as long as you keep it saturated and keep putting more resin on. Look what a great bond it is. The resin is going to soak all the way down into that wood, but you have to keep filling it. So keep going over that joint and make sure you fill the end grain of the plywood, that middle layer of the plywood, and then you'll have a terrific joint there. Okay, looking terrific and lots of fun. The next step will be to break out the hull sections, and then we can complete the coating of the inside, and we'll put a fillet up in the bow section here. Take out that we'll take out that whole number 1 section and that bow piece, and then we'll do a nice fillet up in the bow section, and then we'll be able to pull the tape off the outside after that fillet is set up, and we'll do the same in the stern, and then we'll go back and fill in on the outside where we've left, where we had tape or where we have incomplete coatings, and get those covered, and then we'll be ready to sand down the outside, and then progressing, get some fiberglass cloth on the bottom, get the deck started, and we're going to have a beautiful boat. I can't wait to paddle. Okay, so that's all for now. Okay, now the big moment's come. Time to knock out some of your hull sections. And these are going to be in there fairly tight. It's very aggressive tape, so you have to use a little force. You want to push them towards the larger area of the kayak, not backwards into the smaller part if you're in the back. And in the front, you want to push them backwards into the towards the middle. So doesn't have room to break. You have to be a little bit aggressive, but don't be too rough. And loosen them up, just a little bit of tape, and then you can pull them right out. Try to get as much of the tape out with them as possible. Okay, so there's one. And then if there's any tape, here's some tape left on here. Any tape left on the hull, pull that off. You'll find it pulls off best if you pull it off fairly slowly. The tape and epoxy will not be compatible. The epoxy won't stick to the scummy kind of tape very well. So don't leave any of the tape in place. Here's a little piece right there. Okay, that looks good. If you have some tape that's kind of been captured in the epoxy, any place you've got a sticky surface, you'll probably have some tape there. And you can, any place you might have tape and captured in the epoxy, you can use a narrow chisel just to very carefully split off the epoxy. You don't want to gouge the planking though. Okay, that looks good. Make sure there's no tape in here. Okay, and that's about all there is to it. And look at that, we got a boat. And these sides, of course, when we put the deck on, the sides will be stiffened up even more. Okay, let's even let's take a couple out up here too, up in the front. And then we'll be knocking them all out here as we go. Just kind of work at it, don't put too much force on it all at once. Just kind of work it loose. Okay, there's that piece. And again, pull the tape off. Put the left on. Nope. When the tape is right in the epoxy, it's going to be harder to get off. And you just have to keep working at it. Scrape at it with your fingernails or with a chisel tip. If you want to get all that tape off, and if it's still sticky after you get the carrier for the tape off, it's probably a good idea to hit it with acetone to get any residual stickiness off. But acetone won't work through the carrier to release the tape, so you have to get the carrier peeled off before you get to use acetone. Okay, so there's a piece there. And a little bit on this side too. Okay, let's take this one out. There we go. Okay, sections 4 and 5 out. Nice. And we'll work at that tape a little bit more to get the tape, all the tape off. Don't leave any tape on, it's not going to help any. You can see there's quite a variation. On this side here, where you can't see it, but in here there's really no tape, it all came off. On this side I have a piece of tape captured in here that I'll have to work at here. That's it. There we are. Any little sharp, like right here is a sharp little blob of epoxy. So you can either pop that off with a chisel or hit it with sandpaper. Sandpaper, of course, is the safer approach, but the chisel's a little faster. Okay, that was right here. There. Nice. Looking good. And when we get these sections out, you'll be amazed how light it is. We'll be taking out more than half the weight. So we're looking good. I think that's everything you need to see. And so just get the rest of the sections out, and then we'll be back in a few minutes to show you the next steps. Okay, thank you. Okay, here we are. And this is the first time I've really cheated on you. I already wasn't thinking. I want you to see how to get this piece out, but actually I already knocked it out. So it came out quite easily, but I want to show you now how I did it. I should have waited until you were here, but you were off doing something else, I guess. So anyway, I just took it. It's going to come out pretty easy now, but I just took it, like knocked it here, and pulled and twisted a little bit, and it popped right out. So not a problem. But and then we'll pull this tape out, of course, as well. And again, pulling the tape out really slow. If you pull it off too fast, it's just going to tear. And then you have to get the end again. So just pull it off really slow. Whoops, there. Pull it off slowly and you'll get more of it at each time. Okay, and there we go. That's mostly epoxy up there, I think. We'll sand that off. And then this side too. Okay, that's coming off easy. This is the orange back double-sided tape that's so aggressive. Okay, now at the back, this is real. I haven't knocked these out yet. So, so you can really see, it does take a little bit of force to get them out, but it's not really difficult. Okay, so let's take these pieces out. This one should come out relatively easily. Okay. there's that one. And then the back piece here. Well, that was easy. Can't complain about that. Okay. So got the whole piece out. We actually did not use this strip of tape down here. It didn't look like it was going to be helpful, so we never even took the orange backing off of that. So either way on that would be fine. Okay, and there we are. And now we get to see how light this boat is. And I can tell you, it's super light. So let's back up a little bit here. Look at that, the whole boat. All the bottom half all put together. And we're going to back out a little bit here so you can see exactly what we're doing. Okay. And there. Sorry about the jiggling there. Don't want to make you seasick. Good though, that'll show you. Okay. And lightweight. Look at that. Oh, easy to pick up with one hand. Easy to hold with one hand. That is very nice. And let's get a scale on that. See? Okay, we've got a scale now. Let's weigh this and see what we've got so far. I think we'll have to try to zoom in on the scale here. Should be able to read it. Okay, let's see if we can get it up on the scale here. Okay. And there we are, just under 9.5 pounds so far. So that's looking really good. We should be able to keep it under 20 without too much trouble. Okay, 9.5. Well, we'll add fiberglass cloth to this part, and then we have the deck. We'll be right around 20. We might be definitely between 20 and 25. I don't think we'll be over 25. So that's still pretty easy to pick up and carry and launch and put up on top of a car and everything. So we're looking real good. 9.5 pounds so far. Okay, nice and pretty shape. That bow is nice. Has a nice V section at the bow. But then it flares out enough that the water should be thrown off to the side as you paddle instead of having all the water come up over the top deck. And so it should be a very comfortable, very fast boat with that nice V in the front, but a very comfortable boat to paddle, staying fairly dry. Okay, see you soon. Bye. Okay, good morning. As you can see, we've leapt ahead here. Here's our mascot here, Maggie. Hi there. Yes, smile for the camera. Okay. Good. There we go. Now, big smile. Okay. Well, okay, that's good now. Shake. Can you shake? Can you shake? Yeah. Can you shake? Yeah. Can you shake? Shake. Shake. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, good job. Good job. Yeah. I zoomed in a little bit much, but anyway, I think they got the idea. Okay. Now, getting distracted here. Sorry about that. As you can see, we've zoomed ahead and done some steps without your getting to see them. Now that was not intentional. It wasn't like they were really difficult steps, so we didn't want you to see how they went. It was a technical difficulty in the filming. So I want to review what we've done here and catch you up to speed. It was fairly simple, so I don't think there'll be any problem in understanding what we've done or in executing it. One thing that I want to point out is in the cleaning off the amine blush, we did want to go all the way back up the planking, up in this area at the back of the boat, all the way up in here, all the way to the silica here, where the silica starts. So that was important because the fiberglass tape is going to run all the way back up here. It's hard to see it there, but it's all the way back up there. Just two last notes about that, the last steps we're doing and talking about, and they're real quick. The first comment is if you decide to do those 4 steps as 4 separate steps, that's okay. Not quite as good because you don't get the molecular bond between the layers of epoxy in the 4 different steps. But the other thought is that if you do them as separate steps, you're going to have to wipe down with acetone any areas where the next step will overlap with the first step. If you let the epoxy from the first step set up before you start the second step, you'll need to remember to wipe down with acetone to get off the amine blush anywhere the 2 steps will overlap with each other. So that's one extra step and a little time consuming. So that's another reason for doing them all together, all 4 steps together. The other thought is in speed and getting all this done. If it's a warmer climate, warmer day, and you really don't have the option of doing it in 70-degree weather, the temperature of the resin before you start is really a very big factor in how fast the resin's going to set up. So if it's a warmer day, try to have your resin cool before you start. Keep it in a cool place. Definitely don't have it sitting in the sun. Keep it in the coolest place you can think of. You might even put your resin in the refrigerator for an hour before you start to cool it down. You don't want it super chilled because it'll be sort of thick and harder to work with, less runny. The viscosity, if you get it really chilled, the viscosity will be so low that it won't saturate the Kevlar very well or the fiberglass tape. So you don't want it super chilled, but if it's just a little bit cooler than, if the resin's at 65 degrees or so, that's going to give you a lot more time to work with the resin than if the resin's at 85 degrees or 80 degrees. It'll go off super fast if the resin before you start to mix it is heated. So that's something to keep in mind. A couple of tips there. Okay, and onwards. We're going to be working on the bottom next and get the fiberglass. We'll get it sanded down smooth on the cedar planking, and then we'll get the fiberglass coating on the outside, and we're going to have this super boat, real light, really fast, really fun. Okay, just wanted to make those 2 additional comments to accelerate, smooth your path and make things easier. Okay, thanks, talk to you soon. Okay, here we are, and I really need to be doing some other things, but I'd rather work on the kayak. It's more fun. So just have a few minutes here. And just to fill you in, we've pulled the tape off on the bow and on the stern. And most of it comes off fairly well, although you'll find that some of it's sort of entrapped in the epoxy and isn't going to peel off. Pull off as much as you can. You can use a chisel or some other sharp object to scrape some of it off. Actually, probably this is better than a chisel. Actually, the chisel tends to want to gouge the wood a little bit if you're not really careful. So something like this, which really isn't sharp but is a hard surface, will help get off a little bit more of it. But you don't have to work too hard at it. Just take off the most, what comes off relatively easily, get that off. Okay, and then we'll sand the rest off. I want to show you something about sandpaper. This is, give you a close-up view of this. This is great stuff. I ran into this once, and bought some pretty big packages, and I'm still using it. I'm hoping I can find it again because it works great. I'm going to come up fairly close, make sure you can see that. This is the 100 grit. 100 grit means that in 1 square inch of sandpaper, there are 100 grains of abrasive material. And so as you know, 50 grit, you'd only have 50 grains, bigger grains. So as you get to lower numbers, it gets coarser. Okay, so this is 100 grit, and here, I guess I was showing the Spanish. Pro grade sandpaper, 3M, and it's pretty amazing stuff, this purple stuff. Okay, little tip on sandpaper. If you're using a sanding block, the sanding blocks are great like this, but they hold half a sheet folded in half again. So this is a quarter of a sheet wide. So one of the neat, if you use scissors, you ruin the scissors instantly, of course. If you use a knife blade, you're going to dull your knife blade. So the way I like to do this, cutting it, fold it, grit in, surface in, so the grit surfaces are facing each other. I like to use an old hacksaw blade, and I actually only use this for sandpaper, cutting sandpaper, so I put some duct tape at the bottom so I'm not having to hold the teeth. And then just take it and saw the paper. It comes out real neat, and that hacksaw blade will last, you know, the next 50 years for cutting sandpaper. Doesn't have to be really sharp. So that was a dull hacksaw blade that we then turned into a sandpaper blade. Okay, and then fold that in half. You want to be fairly neat on these. It's just going to work better. This is pretty much used up there. So we're going to flip this. If you pull these wings up too far, it's going to crack right across here. We've done that. And of course, let's see. This looks like it's been used. I might still get some out of that. One of the so I'm not going to tear these off right now, but one of the neat things here is this is brand new sandpaper. If you tear that off, you have these nice little sanding pads from the little end piece that's brand new and cuts really well. So don't throw this part away yet. That's my favorite part of the sandpaper, is the end parts. Okay, so just pry the wing back a little bit, not too far. Actually, I like to hold it here where it's going to crack and pry the tip back, so bending it back. And slide that all the way in. Now on the second side, it's not going to go all the way in. You're just going to do it's going to fold and go in. So get it in there, and then it's got a fold there. That's always going to be the way it is. Okay, and that's the 100 grit is going to take this right down. Okay, so we'll take the last tape off with sanding. You can see we'd already sanded this a little bit up in here to get the tape off, but I did leave this last bit so you can see how this goes. It goes quite easily and quickly. Now in sanding, you're going to cut faster going across the grain. You'll remove more wood that way, and that's fine, but at the end, if your last strokes have been across the grain, you're going to have a lot of scratch marks that when it's coated, they'll show up a little bit, especially with this coarse grit. So fine to go across the grain to move more wood faster, but finish off with the grain to take those scratch marks out. Okay, there, so you can see we've done two things. We've taken the tape off and we've evened off out the surface. So we've taken off the high spots, evened out the surface. Now, in sanding this down, this is going to apply to the whole boat. We don't necessarily have to go down to bare wood everywhere. The high spots will definitely go down to bare wood, And but the low spots can stay filled with epoxy. And when we add the cloth, that'll bridge over any slightly lower spots and fill with resin under the cloth. So we don't have to have everything down to bare wood, and we don't have to have everything exactly perfectly smooth. We do want to have it fairly smooth though. I would say a variation of a 1/16 of an inch is absolutely the most you want to have, and I'd probably think it was better to go with a variation more like a 32nd of an inch, where one plank might be a 32nd of an inch lower than another plank. That'll fill quite easily with epoxy when you do the fiberglass coating. A 1/16 of an inch will not be quite as good. So let's aim for having everything flush within a 32nd of an inch. But we don't have to have it 100% flush because we're going over it with fiberglass cloth and epoxy. However, just a thought, when you're earlier on, when you're lining up your planks, any extra epoxy to fill in a plank that's a little bit low is just extra weight. That extra epoxy is not going to add a lot of strength, it's just going to add a little bit of weight. Okay, so looking good, all the tape's off and starting to get cleaned up. And the next step is going to be coating from the outside all these places where we had tape on the outside, and it's bare wood, and the front and the back where we had tape, and so it's bare wood with no epoxy. The reason for coating these is that we want to make sure that we have filled completely between the strips. We're not really concerned about the surface coating because a lot of that will get sanded off. All the high spots will be sanded down to bare wood, but we do want to make sure that we have filled between the strips of wood. And so we're going to coat the bare wood first, and then, but we won't coat the plywood yet because we'll get a better bond with the cloth to the plywood where it's bare wood. So we won't coat the plywood yet. We'll just be coating the cedar strips where it's bare wood. Okay, so that bare plywood that you see there will stay uncoated until we add the fiberglass cloth, which is when we'll coat all of that. Okay, so you can see all the bare wood there. That's where we'll be coating. And I think we'll, you've seen us do the same process on the inside. Just a reminder, you're not just coating it, you're working the epoxy in with, brushing over it up and down and horizontal. So work that epoxy in really thoroughly between the cracks. And I think we'll probably mix, again, it's fairly cool here. It's fall in the Northwest, beautiful Pacific Northwest, in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains here. So I think we'll probably start, we'll just do 4 large marks, but I anticipate we'll probably use slightly more than that, but 4 large marks will get us a good way along, and then you can guess based on those, how far those first 4 marks go, how many more marks to finish off the project, coating the bare wood where on top of the strips, the cedar strips. Okay, so I don't think you need to see this next step, and it's fairly quick and easy. So we'll be back after we've got that wood coated. Okay, and then we'll be ready, once that sets up, we'll be ready to sand down the cedar strip areas, sand down all the epoxy till we have real smooth surface for our fiberglass cloth, and then we'll be ready to lay on the light fiberglass cloth. It's 4-ounce fiberglass cloth, and so that'll be exciting. That will be the last step on finishing off the bottom of the hull. So we're closing in on having the bottom half finished. Okay, good enough. We'll be back soon. Okay, there's the whole boat there. Nice shape. And super light still. It's very, very light. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye. Just one more note. Thought I should see if I can get it in the camera. Thought I should reiterate this. I think maybe we mentioned it before, but I want to make sure. Remember the amine blush on the epoxy that's set up? So at this stage, we want to use our acetone on a rag with gloves and wipe right over the areas where it's bare wood. I have already done that step on the boat, so that's why no glove and no acetone. When you wipe over it, the bare wood will turn dark like the epoxy coated wood until the acetone evaporates, then the bare wood will turn back to its lighter color. Okay, so remember, wipe off any amine blush. And another, wipe off any amine blush. Okay, see you soon. Bye. Okay, quick note here. We're just coating these areas. A couple of things. A lot of these taped areas are butt joints. The butt joints are great for gluing, but they need more resin because the resin will soak into the end grain. So it doesn't hurt to go over those butt joints again. Another point, when you get to the lower in your container with the resin, it helps to set the lid underneath the edge of the container so all of your resin runs into the corner so you can grab it more easily. So a couple of points there. I think the last thing was just the amount of resin this was taking, and as I guessed, we're not quite enough with the 4, so we're mixing up 2 more. We got all the way down one side, bow and stern, and back about a third of the way down the second side. So mixing up 2 more to finish that second side. Oh, I've just been using the acid brush for putting it on. We're not coating a lot of area, so I don't think there's any reason to use a 1-inch brush, just the little metal handle brush here for mixing and applying. And anything else? I think that's most of it. Just oh, I know. If it's a warm climate and above 75 degrees when you're doing this, you probably want to mix smaller batches, maybe 2 or 3 marks at a time, and just keep mixing small batches because you don't want this to start getting too thick in the pot while you work. So if you don't want to rush and it's warmer, mix smaller batches. That's always the case. Smaller batches are going to make it easier in warmer climates. Okay, I think that covers most of what we need to tell you. And we'll finish this up on the far side and we'll be ready to sand it down pretty soon. So looking good. Okay, talk to you soon. Okay, that worked out just right with that extra 2 that we mixed up. We have just a little bit of extra, not much so. Probably could have done with just 1 extra at the end there, but with the remainder that we had in the pot, we came back along the first side and then all the way down the second side, filling those butt joints again. And most of them could use a little bit more because it wicks right into the end grain of the cedar planking and makes a terrific bond, but you don't want that joint to be starved of resin because it's all wicked into the end grain. If it all disappears into the end grain, there's none left in the joint, no epoxy left in the joint, then you really don't have a bond there. So hitting those end grains again, the butt joints again, is a real good idea. Second time around, you can do it a 3rd time around if you're really enthusiastic, but I think twice around is probably adequate. And then a question came up about whether in all this, going over the boat, it's like, oh, you start to notice some joints between planks, seams between planks that aren't completely full of resin. Is that a problem at this point? Should you use some of your resin to fill those joints? Where it's bare wood, definitely, where you're doing the filling the bare wood under where the tape used to be, definitely fill the joints, the seams between the planks as much as possible. But it's not such a good idea to go and fill seams in between the bare wood places, because you haven't wiped off the amine blush there. So the epoxy on top of the epoxy might not stick as well if you did develop an amine blush in those areas. So I would caution you not to fill in any open seams, or where you think, oh, that's more open than it should be. We'll be doing that later, after we've wiped the entire sides down and after we've done our sanding. We'll be filling those areas later, and we'll actually even be going back over those areas with a pre-thickened mixture that will fill those more open seams really thoroughly. So not to worry about those now. We'll take care of that before we put the fiberglass cloth on. Okay, so I think that covers it, and we'll let that set up, and then we'll be ready to wipe it all down, and then we'll start sanding. You may wonder, well, why wipe it down if we're going to sand it? Well, the reason for wiping it down before sanding is that amine blush clogs up the sandpaper, and your sandpaper won't last nearly as long because it gets clogged up with the amine blush. So much easier to wipe it down first and then sand it. So the next thing we'll be doing is wiping the whole sides with acetone, and then we'll be ready to sand the planking. And you may have noticed at the bow and stern, it sands out really nicely, and it gets quite smooth. It's still a little bit rough, ridged at this point, but it'll sand out really nicely. And we'll still have plenty of planking thickness to be a very strong and light boat. So looking really good, and can't wait for the next stage. Fun project. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye. Okay, it's really late at night and it's really noisy in here, but this is a real simple step that I just wanted to get done while this other machine is finishing up. And this is just wiping down the outside of the boat to get off the amine blush. So not much to it. This time we have all the bare wood covered up with epoxy, so we're just going to wipe it down with warm water. That takes the amine blush off this as well. So we're going to use a fair amount of water and wipe it down, make sure we got all that amine blush off. And we won't be doing any more work on it tonight, so it'll have all the rest of the night to get dry. So the water is a good solution, easier than the acetone, and don't have to worry about our hands or gloves. Okay, so this is how it goes. Finish up the rest of it. That's how it goes. Use plenty of water so you get into the cracks a little bit. Get it real clean, then towel it off. Try not to get the plywood, the bare wood, the plywood too wet. It's a little bit damp, might not hurt. But if you get too wet, the grain will raise up and you'll have more sanding to do. So try to avoid the bare wood on the plywood. Just try it. You get along the edge where the epoxy is without getting the bare wood. Okay, we'll see you when this is done. See you tomorrow. Bye. Okay, now for a quick wipe down with acetone right along the edges of the bare wood and down the center line, and we'll be finished. We finished it up we did all the sides with water and toweling it off. So now we'll just do a quick thing with acetone, we'll be done. Acetone, it doesn't get the wood wet, so you're not going to raise the grain. So we're going to be on the joint between bare wood
and coated wood, it's best to hit that with the acetone rather than the water. Okay, enough shouting for tonight, and that machine's almost finished, and we're pretty well done for tonight. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Bye. Okay, here we are, and we've moved outside for the sanding step, and in case you couldn't hear the last bit about wiping the boat down with water and then using acetone as a final stage, use plenty of warm water. Keep it on the epoxy coated surfaces. If you get too much on the plywood, you'll find that you're raising the grain on the plywood, and that takes more sanding. So use the water where you've got solid epoxy, and then what we did was take acetone and wipe along the edge where we were both wiping on the epoxy surface and wiping on the bare wood of the plywood surface, and down the center line with the acetone as well. Okay, and now this stage, this step you can do by hand, but you'll have quite a bit more time involved in doing it by hand than if you have some sort of power sanding equipment. If you're using power sanding equipment, be a little cautious. Once you go through the epoxy, it's you can go. The cedar's fairly soft. You can go through the cedar awfully quickly. So belt sander will take it down the fastest. Vibrating sander will work too. But a good approach is to take it down most of the way with power sanding equipment, but then to do the final bit by with hand sanding. So you make sure you don't take off more than you need to. And there are some places where there might be a deeper plank, deeper groove, and we don't need to have that flush completely. We can fill a little bit with epoxy. So the goal here is to get a fairly smooth surface. Doesn't have to be perfectly smooth, because we can fill any place with epoxy that we need to, and when we put on the fiberglass cloth, the epoxy will be under the cloth, so that'll fill some. So we want a fairly smooth surface, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Goal is not to sand through any place. If you did sand through any place, you could fill with thickened epoxy on the inside. Be easiest if you hadn't sanded completely through, but that should not be an issue unless your planking was a little bit erratic to start with. However, even if it is erratic and you sand through, not to worry. A little epoxy on the inside, pre-thickened epoxy on the inside, and then when we glass over it all, you'll still have a very strong, beautiful boat. And if you think you want even more strength, you could actually put 2 coats of fiberglass cloth on the outside, but you'd be adding significant weight. And don't need these yet, do I? You'd be a little easier to hear myself talk. You'd be adding significant weight by adding a second layer of fiberglass cloth on the outside. Would make the boat tougher, but shouldn't be necessary. Okay, and mask. So I'll be wearing eye protection, hearing protection. I'll be wearing a filter mask. This is just a dust filter. This doesn't filter out any of the organic vapors, so that's why we weren't using this mask when we were doing the epoxy, because you'll still be breathing just as much vapor from the epoxy. But these are great. They're a little lighter than the masks with the more solid organic filter canisters on them. So great to have a dust mask, lightweight one with good straps on it and everything. And there we go. We'll get started. Okay, here we are. I'm gonna move across in front of you. And last point, the on roughing this out, taking it down quickly, a 50 or 60 grit sandpaper is probably what you want to use so it doesn't get clogged up real quickly. Okay, and let's see if you can see a bit of this process. We'll just let you see the beginning, and then we'll show you when it's finished.
couple of keys in using a belt sander are never let your belt sander sit still for a minute in one place. Always take long strokes, at least 2-3 feet back and forth. And then one other point that causes people trouble. They'll be sanding, looking in front where they're sanding. They're going back and forth over that, right there, and look, and look. Well, they think they're sanding here, but in reality, more of the sanding is happening underneath the sander where they can't see, because that's where the sander is returning to and sitting all the time when they're looking at it up here. So be really alert not to be sanding in excess back underneath the sander when you think you're sanding in front of the sander. Okay, so that's a bit of a tip there. If you haven't used a belt sander before, it's a great tool, very useful. But you might want to practice on some just some scrap pieces of wood and get used to how it balances, how it feels in your hand, and get a little bit of practice with it before starting in on the boat. That's probably about it. Oh, and the other thing is, if you haven't used a belt sander so much, don't do as much with the belt sander. Leave more for hand sanding. And it's nice to have your sanding block right out here with you at the same time, so you can alternate when you get an area sanded down to where you think it's pretty good. Now I've got a little bit of a hard spot right there, so that'll come out easily with the hand sanding. So don't be hesitant to switch back and forth. The hand sanding, the paper we have here is the 100 grit purple paper, 3M paper. Okay, and that feels much better. Took the hard spot out real quick there. The 50 grit on the belt sander is going to tear the wood up pretty roughly. The 100 grit starts to smooth it out a little bit. And so you can alternate, do a certain area with the belt sander, and then do it with the hand sanding till you get it to the point you want it at. You do not have to get all the epoxy off everywhere. Leaving some epoxy on the hull is fine. That won't hurt anything at all. So we don't have to wood it everywhere. Just the high spots are going to be bare wood, and then the low spots will still be filled with epoxy. Okay, looking good. Can't wait to get the started on the cloth. Okay, we'll keep working at this. I'm going to get a couple of clamps to put on my strong back on my sawhorses, so I can push sideways against the boat for sanding the edges, and we'll get this done. Okay, bye. Now when you get up onto the sides, you may want to use some kind of creative clamping arrangements. Don't torque your hull too much, because it's not as strong as it will be with after you put the fiberglass cloth on the deck and the deck on. It'll be a lot stronger. So still be a little gentle, but if you can get that side surface so it's closer to horizontal, it's going to be a lot easier to sand with the belt sander. So we've got the boat kind of leaning against the clamp down at this end, and a clamp up here underneath the boat to keep from skidding sideways. And let's hit it here. Okay, here we are, and late afternoon sunlight. It's beautiful out here, and I have the boat slightly differently. I sanded most of it down with it kind of wedged in at a funny angle, and that worked okay, but subsequently I found that I could get it a little flatter and up on its side like this, and it's much easier to work on like this. So we're still just finishing up with the 50 grit sandpaper, almost done with that, and then we'll hit it quickly. We could either finish with 50 grit and then move to hand sanding block with about 100 grit, or else we can go over it again quickly with 100 grit and then 150 grit with the belt sander, and that'll be a little bit faster. So we'll probably do that. But at this point, if you switch to a hand sanding block with the purple 3M paper, 100 grit that should go really quickly, and then after the 100 grit you might move to 120 grit and then maybe 150 grit with hand sanding. Okay, so you can see how well this will go now. Got again our safety equipment and our mask and our ear protection, and set my glasses down someplace. I'll be right back. Okay, so here we are, and the new camera. So the advantage of this camera is the screen flips around and I can actually see that I'm in the viewfinder now. Okay, and here we go. Okay, looking good. Now, one more thing about belt sanders. Here's the sander. Notice that it's flush on this side, and we've got part of the motor hanging out on this side, and the gear drive and everything, or the belt drive. Let's back out a little bit more. Whoopsie. Okay, so the sander doesn't balance exactly right. It tends to want to tip this way. And so when you're using a belt sander, you've always got to be pushing down on the outside, on this side here, to get it to sand evenly. If you just use the weight of it, it's always going to be sanding more aggressively along this side where you've got the pieces hanging out than on the other side. It won't sand evenly. So when you're using it, you're always twisting it a little bit, pushing down, adding a little pressure on the outside to keep it sanding level. The biggest thing with belt sanders, you never want to let it ride up on an edge, because if all the weight of the sander's on this one edge, it'll cut a groove right down into the wood really fast. So don't ever let it ride up on either edge. On this edge it's going to do less damage because you're going to be, as you ride up, you're going to be pressing on the casing here instead of on the sandpaper. But if you ride up on this edge, you'll cut a groove right down into the cedar pretty quick. Okay, so this side is looking really nice with the 50 grit. I'll hit the other side, just a couple places on the other side, and then we'll switch to the 100 grit and then the 150 grit, and we'll have this boat looking really good. There are a few places still where there'll be a slight dip in the planking. Don't worry about that. You don't have to sand everything perfectly level at this stage. We'll get all the details. Let's get up close so you can see that a little bit better. Where there are a few places that are not sanded completely flush here. So we'll see if we can get it so you can see those places. And those will fill in with resin, not a problem at all. So don't sand someplace too thin. Here's one that I think you'll be able to see in the camera. See how that darker streak there is not, that area is not quite level. This plank right here, you can definitely feel a ridge. That's probably a 32nd of an inch deep there. If I sanded all these surrounding planks down to this level, I think I'd be getting things pretty thin. So I don't want to do that. I'll just leave that and it'll fill in with epoxy, not a problem. Here's another place that we have that same thing with a couple of planks that I didn't get flush quite as nicely as I could have, but I don't want to sand down to this level because then these other planks will get awfully thin. So I'll be filling this with epoxy as well. So not to worry about those areas. Okay, a little bit here. Don't know if you can see that. Again, right here, that's just, I can feel a very slight dip there. But again, I'm not concerned about that sort of thing. Okay, So that gives you a sense of what you're aiming for and how it's going to look when you finish with the 50 grit. Okay, pretty nicely smoothed out everywhere. And with your hand rubbing over it, you can feel if they're hard spots. And then we'll sand those out. We don't have to sand those out with the 50 grit. We can take those out with 100 grit easily. And so right in here, bit of a hard spot right there. So that'll sand out. A bit of a hard spot right along here. You can feel remarkable. You can't see it, but you can feel it. You can feel remarkably small variations in surface smoothness with your hands. But much more so than what you can see. Okay, good. We'll hit the other side and then we'll switch to 100 grit. Okay, we're just working with the 100 grit now, and with the 100 grit we're going over the epoxy on the bottom. The plywood, we're fairing out this curve right between the bottom plywood and the planking, and we're hitting all the planking. So I'm taking the planking from the 50 grit to the 100 grit, and then probably the next stage, we could go to 150 grit with the belt sander, but I think I'll move to a hand sanding block because you have more feel for the what you're doing with the hand sanding block. It takes a little bit longer, but not that much longer. We've got things all roughed out really nicely. This 100 grit's making it pretty smooth. And so I'll probably go to 120 grit with the hand sanding block, and I'll be feeling especially for any hard spots, you know, where I haven't got a smooth curve. And for instance here, I can feel a hard spot right in here and another hard spot right here. Those will sand out really quite easily though, by hand. So looking good, and in fact it's looking beautiful. And bit of a balancing act here. Remember, we're building an ultralight kayak. The more you sand, the lighter the boat gets, but you still need to have enough strength that that it's going to be strong enough for whatever your purpose is. Remember, if you think you've got it too thin anywhere because your planking wasn't lined up as well as it could have been, you could go ahead with the option of using two layers of fiberglass cloth and adding a lot of strength that way. But on the way this is turning out, one layer is going to be fine, and that'll keep it lighter and swifter and more fun to paddle, and you'll be a lot more likely to use it really often because it's so easy to carry to the lake, so easy to carry to the car, and so easy to lift on top of the car. Whatever your use, however you're going to use it, you'll use it more because it's light and easy to carry and light and fun to paddle. So we're keeping this super light, and it's looking great, coming out great. Okay, and the sun's just about to leave us, so we'll let you get on with the next step here. Okay, bye now. Okay, now we have this beautiful shell, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. So smooth and elegant and light. And if you're still deciding whether you want to sand it down by hand to this stage or use a belt sander, the difference is probably in the range of 6 or 7 hours of time to do it between the two. So I would guess you'd probably be sanding for about 3 hours with the belt sander, maybe 2.5, maybe even 2 hours if you're fast with the belt sander, and maybe 7, even 8 hours by hand possibly to get a really good job. Belt sanders are great tools. They're the most efficient sanding tools you can have, and if you don't have one and you get it, you'll use it for all sorts of things. You'll find it's really useful. Anytime you want to move wood fairly quickly and get a really good surface, the belt sander is great. if you don't want to buy one and yet you do want to use one, tool rental place is a great option, and you can rent it for one day and you'll be all through with it by the end of the day, and return it for just a one-day rental. So that's a great option, and buying one, they really only cost about, I would guess you could get a nice one for $100, and so not a major expenditure considering how much you might end up using it on other projects as well. So a few options there. Hand sanding is great. I'm a great enthusiast of using one's own energy, but it will go a lot faster with a belt sander. Either way though, you can do a really fine job and have it turn out just as well either way. Okay, now we're going to move to the, I may have misspoke earlier. The two grits I have every grit imaginable in all sorts of paper, but the two grits I have in this purple paper, which I'm raving about so enthusiastically, is our 80 grit and 100 grit. I may have thought I had 100 and 120, but it's 80. The coarser stuff is 80, and the finer paper is 100. So I'm going to go over this now with 100 grit on the sanding block, and then at the end I'll probably take it off the sanding block, because still the sanding block is a square flat surface and you can't really create a perfect round. So at the end I'll probably take it off the sanding block and be doing it by hand, where I can feel the round and take down any hard spots. It's nice if you can get it so it's a perfect smooth curve. You know, as I feel this, there's a hard spot right there, hard spot right there, a very small hard spot right here. You know, they're very small, and just a couple of sweeps with the sandpaper take those hard spots right off. It's nice if you can get it so it's a perfect smooth surface with no hard spots. Okay. Oh, there was one other thing about the belt sander that is important. Probably the worst problem with a belt sander can be caused by the cord. If the cord catches under the table leg or under your foot or anything, or just reaches the end of the cord, anything that pulls the cord suddenly tends to tip the sander and gouge the wood. So you want to always be sure, checking constantly, that your cord is not going to catch on something and jerk the sander at a funny angle and dig in. So that's probably the biggest thing. That's what I watch for the most. I always make sure my cord is free for the length of the stroke I'm taking, because if you reach halfway through or near the end of your stroke and the cord stops it, you'll dig in. You'll twist the sander and you'll dig in. So that, and the fact that these sanders really aren't balanced correctly because of the extension on one side, and you have to intentionally push it down on the other side to keep it balanced. The cord, and that fact of needing to twist it with your hand, and always being careful not to dig the edge of the sandpaper into the wood, not to ever let the sander ride up on its edge so it's just sanding on the edge of the paper, because it'll cut a deep groove really quickly. Those are the most important aspects to using a belt sander. Okay, and you know, my real preference is for hand sanding. This is the fun part. Okay, so keep moving. Oh, well, there are all these points. The other aspect of a belt sander, just like what I was going to say on the sandpaper, you keep moving it. You never let it sit in one place. You'll go way farther into the wood than you think if you let it sit in one place. You keep moving it, long strokes, just like sanding strokes, just like your hand sanding. Keep changing the angle, never stay on one angle. Keep changing the angle as you sand different areas of the boat, different parts of the side, and keep moving it all the time. And same with the sandpaper. Notice how it's moving up on the boat and then moving down just gradually. So never staying in the same area. Okay, long strokes. Long strokes tend to fair everything out. So it'll come out real even. Oh, another point is, right now, the boat's probably at its most delicate. You've sanded off a lot of, you know, quite a bit of wood, and you don't have any coating on the outside now. It's bare wood. You do have your coating and your carbon fiber strips on the inside, so that's helping. But and you don't have any deck supporting it, so you can see how flexible these sides are now. So right at this point, your boat's probably at its most delicate. So handle it carefully. If you're going to pick it up, you know, by both sides, or pick it up where the Kevlar is in the middle of the boat. The Kevlar is really quite strong and will reinforce the boat for picking it up easily there. Once we get the fiberglass cloth on, and once we get the deck on, we'll have a very strong boat. But for now, be a little gentle with it. Okay, now that feels fairly nice. Few remaining small hard spots. I'm going to jump ahead. Typically I'd sand the whole boat at this point with the block and keep going, but I want to show you the next step. So I'm going to take this paper off the block and I'll show you what we'll be doing next. Next we'll be putting it in our hand and letting it curve around the boat. Now this is how you'll get the final shape of the boat, so you don't have any hard spots at all, because you're curving the paper with your hand to conform perfectly to the boat. Okay, and you can see it doesn't take very long if you have good sandpaper. Another point, we can go at a bit of an angle here. See, I'm starting up here and ending up down here. That's a bit of an angle, but you never sand across the grain. You'll spend an awful lot of time getting out the scratches that you've created if you sand just for briefly across the grain. You're always sanding with the grain, especially true with the belt sander, but because it cuts so quickly, but also true with the hand sanding. So only very rare moments when you might want to take off really a lot of wood really quickly that you might consider sanding across the grain, but that's almost never necessary, and it may create much more work sanding out those crushed grain scratches than the time you save by making it move the wood faster. So typically the rule is always with the grain. Okay, now let's see if we're getting close there. I feel a little hard spot right here through the sandpaper, so we'll get that just a little bit longer. Okay, that feels good now. Now the final test. Ooh, nice, nice. No hard spots. You can rub it with your hand. You can rub across the grain. All smooth, no hard spots. Okay, so that's beautiful. That's it. Okay, so this part on this side is ready for the next step, which will be the fiberglass cloth. And I'll work my way on down and see how much more light we have here. And she's looking great. And look at this. The sanding block probably weighs as much as this end of the boat. Not quite, but look how light that is. That is super. Okay, one finger, easy. Pinky, easy. Look at that, lifting it with the pinky, half the boat. Okay, so that's what we're aiming for, something that's super light and fun. That's one of the keys. The biggest problem, amateur boat building is terrific. It's really exciting, it's really fun. There is one big problem that amateurs always have, unless they are really focused on this one issue, and that is weight. The first boat I built was a 24-foot ferro cement boat, and the trouble with cement boats is cement is cheap and it's heavy. So a lot of people, a lot of first-time builders, that was what, more than 40 years ago that I built that boat. And it was great. I sailed it all through the Bahamas and down to Haiti, and had a terrific, all the way down the East Coast, through the Bahamas, down to Haiti. Terrific voyage, terrific adventure with that boat. But it was never a fast boat. And so that's the biggest problem that amateurs have with boats. They think, well, we'll just make it a little bit stronger. And so they add more material and more weight. And in the end, their boat is overweight and never going to be quite as fast or quite as high performance as they really had hoped for. So watch the weight. Remember, with epoxy, epoxy is great for bonding things together. It's great for bonding cloth fabric, Kevlar or fiberglass cloth or carbon fiber cloth onto something. It's terrific in those ways, but epoxy by itself with no fabric and no wood doesn't add much strength. So building up a real thick coat of epoxy is not going to add much strength. It's just going to add weight. On the inside, we wanted enough epoxy that it would be completely watertight, waterproofing the wood so no moisture would ever get into the wood, and a little bit of abrasion resistance in case something's banging around inside the boat or our feet are scraping someplace. But just adding a lot of epoxy without fiberglass cloth or without wood or without carbon fiber ribbons, that will not add any strength. It'll just be adding weight. So keep that in mind, and let's build an ultralight boat. Okay, there we go. Okay, light is fading, pretty much gone, but we've got it all sanded down. It's all smooth, it looks beautiful. With the hand sanding, the more the better. You're not going to sand through with hand sanding. The more you sand, the smoother she'll get. With the belt sander, don't overdo it with the belt sander though, because you could sand right through. It's pretty aggressive. So she's looking great, and what a great way to spend the afternoon, and late afternoon actually. I didn't start this till about 5 o'clock, 5 or 6, and it's mid-November now, so it's probably only about 7 o'clock now. So it's gone real quick. Okay, I just wanted to show you the last stage here. Light as a feather. Pretty neat. Okay, now a little interlude. Outdoors, beautiful. By the way, this is about November 10th in the Pacific Northwest. I can't say it's always like this throughout the whole winter, but it can be splendid. It's probably about 65, 70 degrees out here. 65 at least. Okay, a little, now, you may be thinking, after sanding the boat down, it's getting pretty thin. It's light, that's great, but is it really strong enough? And so that's why I want to show you a little bit about wood here. This may be familiar to you, or maybe it's entirely new. Okay, let's take some look at some branches. These are all dead branches, except for one maple branch, still a little green. This is a piece of alder, and it's kind of stiff, but look what happens. Whoa, just snaps. In fact, this piece here flew right off. You bend it a little bit, it's kind of stiff to start with, but you bend it a little bit and it just snaps. And there's no flaw there, that's good wood. Dry, not green, it's a little more flexible green, but dry. We can't build a boat out of green wood and keep it green. So use alder for a boat, maybe for furniture, but no, not for a boat. Its strength to weight ratio is not very good. It's fairly dense. It's a, it's a deciduous tree. It's a hardwood, not as hard as real dense hardwoods, but nice enough for furniture. Not one of the top quality furniture woods, but really not anything you'd ever use for a boat. Okay, so that's alder. Gone. Let's take a look at this next piece. Here's a piece. This is birch here. This is a piece of birch. Pretty thick cross section there. You can see, here's my finger. You can see it's quite a bit thicker than my finger. Let's see what happens. This is going to be a little harder to bend, and because it's thick enough. Oh, well, goodness sakes, that really didn't take much force to break, and it just broke clean off. Look at that. It didn't really bend at all before it broke. It just snapped. So birch, whew, has several really bad properties. It's fairly heavy wood. It can make nice furniture, but it's fairly heavy, and it just isn't very strong. It isn't flexible. Has some initial stiffness, but boy, once you bend it, it snaps right off. And the other thing about birch is it rots really easily. A birch log left out in the forest for 6 months isn't any good for firewood anymore often, because it's already rotten. Now let's take a look at maple. Now maple's a good wood. This is actually a green piece of maple. Here's a dry piece of maple. So we have both. We're going to find the green should be more flexible than the dry, but you can't build a boat out of, I mean, you can build it out of green wood. That's not a very good idea because it'll shrink a lot. But you can't keep a boat green. So this is maple. Oh, a little more whoop, there it goes again. Yeah, we bent it a little farther than the birch or the alder. And here's a dry piece of maple just for comparison. Let's take this thicker part down here. And again, it's stiff. It's stiff, but let's watch what happens. How far does it bend? Whoa! Hardly bend at all. And I wasn't pulling incredibly hard there. It's not like I'm super muscle man here breaking big pieces of wood. And when it gets thinner up here, it just snaps again. Okay, so that's alder, birch, maple. Pretty nice for furniture, but out of the question for boat building. Okay, now, whoa, look at that. That's pretty light. That's really light. It's not a big piece, but it's like, it doesn't weigh anything. It's super light. Guess what this is? Western red cedar. Okay, and let's do a little bit of a test on this. Is it just going to snap like the other ones did? Oh, now there's a fair amount of bend there. Whoa, that's way more bend. That's twice as much bend as any other wood took. Okay, let's keep going. There, I'm hearing something there. It's probably got a little flaw in it someplace. Well, look, we're almost bent double there. That's Western red cedar. Can you see that okay? See how that bends? Now we're bent double. We're touching ourselves again. That's Western red cedar. Super, super light. Incredibly flexible. This is dry and dead. This is not a living branch. This is not green. This is dry and dead. And see what it does. See if I can... I should be able to break this. See, it's easy to bend. I don't used to have to use my knee. It's easy to bend, but look how far it's bending without breaking. And now it's taking a huge amount of force. Ah! And again, even that thicker part's bent almost double, and it hasn't broken. Now that's an amazing wood to use for boat building. The other thing about cedar is, that sun's kind of bright. Didn't expect that for November. The other thing about cedar is that it's very rot resistant. It's qualified as one of the most rot resistant woods in North America. Black locust is a little bit better. If you're going to put a post in the ground, use either Western red cedar or black locust, and the black locust will out. Hey, yeah, I got my mascot here playing with my sticks. See if you can see that. Yeah, helping out there a little bit. Yeah, yeah. Oh, do you have a stick, Maggie? Whoa, are you going to take that stick away? Off you go. Whoa, can't keep up with you. Okay, well, that's, well, I can't remember what that looks like, the alder, I think. Okay, and here we are back again. Sorry about that little interlude, but we have a good time together. Okay, so here's our cedar. Again, bent double. Let's try to break it. Ay, ay, ay. Oh, whoa. See, it springs back. I mean, it's back to where it started out, almost. Okay, see if we can break it. Ay, gosh, this is hard. Okay, we'll break it. Ah, no, I can't believe it. Oh my gosh, see, look at that. Look, I mean, this is dry and dead. This is not green. And it's like unbreakable. Ah! Well, so much for that demonstration. I guess that failed in that we can't break it. Look at that. That was a straight piece of wood. Now it's bent double. It wasn't steamed. I'm not goofing. I didn't soak it in vinegar or anything. It just won't break. Okay, so amazing wood. Lightweight, super flexible, and rot resistant. Doesn't absorb water, doesn't get heavier. Let's use Western red cedar for every boat project we want. Unless we want a harder, denser wood, then let's use white oak. That's a great comp. It's very strong. White oak is remarkably flexible as well. It's very dense, but it's very heavy. Its strength to weight ratio
is not quite as good as Western red cedar because it's such a heavy wood. In Western red cedar, if you want a really strong beam, you can build quite a thick beam and have a much lighter, more rigid beam than you'll have with white oak, because white oak for the same weight could not be nearly as dimensionally thick. The cedar could be, cedar's about 24 pounds per cubic foot on average. It varies a lot, as do all woods. White oak averages about 41 to 42 to 43 pounds per square foot. So white oak is not quite twice as heavy as Western red cedar, but it's close to twice as heavy. So a beam in white oak that's going to weigh the same as a beam in Western red cedar can only be about half as thick, and that thickness gives a terrific amount of strength if you're doing a beam. So cedar is an amazing wood. And now you're probably wondering, what does a cedar tree look like? What are they like? Well, we've got lots right here. In fact, we've made some of our boats out of cedar trees that grew on our land, and we don't like to cut them down because we're kind of tree lovers. But occasionally we get huge windstorms through here, and cedar trees will blow down, and then we'll have them milled up, and we'll use them for building some of our smaller boats. Now let's take a look at cedar trees. Okay, we're going to rotate you around here a little bit. Yep. Okay, there's a cedar tree right there. Lovely foliage. Stays green all year round and absolutely beautiful. Look at that feathery foliage on this. Is a Western red cedar. Look at that. Isn't that pretty? And it stays exactly that shade of color all year round. So now you'll know how to recognize a Western red cedar. And let me show you something with one of these branches. These are green branches. Oops, here we go. Give me a bit of a topsy-turvy ride here. These are green branches. Well, let's see what we can show you here. No, nothing, we can't break it. Unbreakable, unbreakable. Okay, so that's what the foliage looks like. Let's take a look at a big cedar. Now this is, actually, I say a big cedar, it's quite tall. It's probably 120 feet tall. But as cedars go, this is just a young cedar. Cedars can live up to 1,000 years old, even longer, and get bigger and bigger. Am I shooting the right tree? It's a little hard with the sky behind it, but that one right in the center of the frame is a cedar. You're not, right down the edge of the cloud. That one's a cedar. The one over here to the right is a Douglas fir. That's a good wood too, but it is heavier than cedar. It's about 30 to 32 pounds per cubic foot, unless you hit a really dense batch of Douglas fir, and then it can be up to 40 pounds per cubic foot, almost the same as white oak. So Douglas fir over here, right under the cloud, Western red cedar here, right on the edge of the cloud. And coming down, it's a beautiful tree. And then down at the bottom we have quite a few. All those feathery leaves are Western red cedar. And over here we have the Douglas fir. And just the last look at cedar, if we could get close enough, we could actually see the bark on cedar. And cedar was one of the great woods for the Northwest Indians. They used it for virtually everything. Their homes were built out of it. Their big lodges were built from the Western red cedar. Their totem poles were built and carved Western red cedar. Here we go, we're getting up close now. Their canoes were all built out of Western red cedar, hollowed out logs, and they would take the bark and strip it off. And see how feathery and soft that bark is? It's, it comes right off. They would take the bark, get down to a deeper layer where it strips off, Now this is sort of the dry exterior layer, but you get down to a deeper layer where you can strip long strips of bark off, and they would weave that bark into clothing and other fabric, cedar bark fabric, to make all sorts of things out of carrying bags and everything. So cedar is an amazing wood in every way, and those trees are, this is the same tree we were looking at a minute ago. Now you can see, actually if I stand in front of it, you can see it's a pretty good sized tree, but not big compared to some cedar trees. Some cedar trees take 4 or 5 or 6, up to 10 people to reach around possibly. A really beautiful old growth cedar tree. Okay, so just a look up that beautiful tree, and we have a lot of cedars on our land. This area here, right in through here, is about half cedar and half, there's a big leaf maple, and there's a birch, and there's a Douglas fir back there. But gradually this will be, if this is left untouched, cedar would be probably the end growth forest in this area. Cedar or Douglas fir or hemlock. Hemlock is not a good wood for boat building. It absorbs water really easily. It's not very strong for its weight. It's something you wouldn't want to use. It's not even that good a building wood for studs and framing, even though it's used a lot. It's so much softer than Douglas fir and lighter that builders like to use hem fir. It's also cheaper, like to use hem fir instead of Douglas fir. But if there's any moisture, hem fir just won't last. It'll rot, and it's just not. It's probably only 2/3 as strong as Douglas fir, and less than 2/3 as durable. So if you're building a house, tell the builder to use Douglas fir. It'll cost you maybe 5% more, and the house will last 3 times as long. And if you're building a boat, absolutely do not use hem fir. That's really not appropriate at all. Okay, so that tells a little bit about wood, and if you're completely a novice, and like when I was growing up, I had no idea what, I noticed that some woods were harder and stronger, but I didn't know what they were and such. But as you start to learn about wood, you realize that every different wood species has its own qualities and its own capabilities. And if you use the wrong wood species for a project, that project is not going to turn out the way you hoped. So the more you learn about wood, the more interesting it is. And I just wanted to show you this last view, since it's such a beautiful day. That's the house I built over there. Built every part of it by hand. Zoom in a little bit, and you can see the porch there. That's nice. And that's all Western red cedar siding on the side of that house, and that's the best siding you can put on a house because it lasts so long. A few outbuildings here. That's our varnishing building, and any fiberglass work, molding we do in that building. Wood shed up the hill, and way up at the top, you can just barely see it, up there is another building. That's our tractor shed where we keep the tractor. And here's Maggie. You may hear that vicious animal in the background attacking one of the sticks. There she is. Yeah, there. Wow, look at that animal. Fierce. Yeah, fierce. Amazing. Wow, the power of those jaws. Oh my goodness. Here she comes. Look out. Okay. Good job, Maggie. Good. Yeah, she doesn't even know that she's being filmed, but she's acting a great role. She's acting like a black bear. We sometimes have black bears come down the hill and attack our garbage cans or claw up our cherry trees and stuff. So she's acting like a black bear. Okay, well, that's all I have to show you now. Well, maybe I can go full sweep all the way around if you don't get too dizzy. And down, we'll have, there's our assembly studio down there. And this is our big shop building where we build all these marvelous boats and send them all over the world. Just got a phone call from somebody recently. Better get back to building the kayak soon, but just got a phone call a couple days ago from a nice gentleman in New Zealand, great accent, and he was just calling to tell us that his boat had arrived safely, and we're always pleased to hear that when we ship them as far away as New Zealand and other faraway places. Okay, well, that's your little break outside, like recess, I guess, from building, and then we'll get back to building. Very exciting now. We have the boat all sanded down and looking so smooth and beautiful. Okay, have a nice afternoon. Bye. Okay, here we are in the boat shop. Let's tip you down just a little bit here. Here we are back in the boat shop. That was one way. You can see the kayak right here in the background, if I'm not right in front of it. And there's one more thing I wanted to show you about woods. Again, if you've done a lot of building and working with wood, then this is not new to you. But if you haven't done as much with wood, this might be new. So here are two pieces of Western red cedar. And they're both Western red cedar. That's great. Great wood to use. But let me show you a few differences. See if this... I haven't tested these pieces, but I'm looking at the grain. I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not online. Okay. Can you see that grain pattern, how it dips down here and then back up? So right in this area, it's not running quite straight along the piece. Now look at this piece by contrast. It's going to be hard because it wants to focus on my face. Maybe if I put my face up close, it'll work. Okay. By contrast, this piece, the lines of grain, this is very tight grain. Gosh, they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to grow that much wood. 10 growth rings. That's why it's hard to see those, the grain in that, because the growth rings are so close together. I don't know if you can make that out or not. It looks, sort of blends together for me. Whereas this one is slightly wider grain. That's still, that's still got 5 growth rings in it. That's no problem at all. It should be strong enough, except where there's this waver here. Let's see what happens there. Okay, so now we could measure this and everything, and then it would be, what an incredible, we can do it scientifically, but let's watch what happens. Oh, see how that grain is going across the piece of wood there? That didn't take a lot to bend it and break it. I mean, I didn't bend it very far, and it just snapped. Let's take the same piece down here. Now, that's as far as I bent it in that other area. Okay, it's starting to let go. Okay, well, no, it's still going. Okay, there it went. Okay, that was quite a bit of bending and took a fair amount of force. Okay, now, let's take this piece and try it. Okay, that's as far as that first piece bent, the first break, and it's not breaking it. There, okay, it snapped there. That's quite a lot of bending. And it broke, along the grain more. That's a lot of force, and then it broke. But that's taking a lot of force and taking quite a lot of bending, much more than that first break. Remember that first break? It was like, oh, that broke pretty easily. Well, now, one other thing about what we're doing is we're using a very thin piece of cedar. Let me get a couple of pieces here. These are beautiful pieces. Well, first of all, let me explain how we get such incredible cedar. One of the reasons we can put perfect cedar into these boats, and it's very hard to find perfect cedar, but one of the reasons we can put perfect cedar into these kayaks so they can be super strong but super light at the same time is that we use a lot of cedar for our smaller free sailing boats. And we'll go through all the huge stacks of cedar and just pull out the perfect pieces that have grain that runs almost the whole, one line of grain can be traced almost the whole length of the piece. Okay, so that's important, being able to, starting with really good wood, really straight grained wood, fine grained pieces, because even cedar has a lot of variation in its strength based on how the tree grew and everything else like that. But now another aspect of the kayak is that we're using very thin pieces side by side. If there's a slight weakness in this middle piece, it's supported on both sides by pieces that don't have any weakness right there. One of the pieces on the other side might have a weakness someplace else in it, but it'll be supported by strength on both sides of it too.
So using these thin pieces gives us several advantages. First, they wrap around a curve more easily than wider pieces. And secondly, they support each other. So any weakness in the wood in one piece is not going to affect the strength of the entire boat. Okay, so I think that that's probably plenty of information about why the boats are going to be so strong, and yet why we can still build them incredibly light. Okay, and we'll get back to work soon. Okay, sorry for taking, but I'm a great enthusiast about wood, as you may have noticed, and so it's fun to talk about it. Okay, we're back. A little preparation for the next step. And the next step is going to be adding the carbon fiber tubes to the top edge of the bottom piece. And the carbon fiber tubes are great, very stiff but very light. So that'll give a nice edge to our boat. It'll stiffen up this edge. It may be a little, right now it's a little flexible, but this will stiffen it up nicely and give a nice surface if you rub against a dock or log or something with the shear here. And so it'll work out really nicely. Also, it gives us a nice joint where the deck piece can come into this at a new angle, and since the rod is round, the deck piece will come right into it nicely instead of having two awkward angles trying to meet each other. If we didn't use the round rod, we just had the deck coming into the wooden hull, we'd have two awkward angles meeting each other, whereas this way it makes it very simple joint. We'll be joining the two carbon fiber rods together with a very short sleeve that fits inside the rods, so it'll be invisible. We'll glue those in, the sleeve in with epoxy. That'll be a solid piece of carbon fiber rod, and that'll make a virtually seamless joint. But first, let's clean up our edge. You'll notice that there's still some places on the edge where you can see the shiny epoxy. You want all that to be matte finish. There'll also be some places on the edges where there'll be little bumps up. You want those bumps to be flat, smoothed out, so the carbon fiber rod will lay right on there continuously and not be lifted up away from the edge by any of the bumps. And then we'll also, so that's a very simple step. Just sand it. This is the 100 grit purple sandpaper on a sanding block, a rubber sanding block, and that knocks everything off real quickly. Okay, so that's about all there is to that step there. That's about almost halfway along the boat. Yeah, that's halfway. Done. That's quite quick, unless you had a lot of epoxy dripping down, then you might take a few minutes more. And then this is one of my favorite pieces of parts of the sandpaper. This is what's torn off that was back up underneath the folded over part. So this is brand new sandpaper, hasn't been used, and it's a very convenient size. Now we'll take this and just abrade the epoxy on the top two planks, because then we'll get a better bond there. We want when we glue the carbon fiber tube on to the edge, we want the epoxy that we'll get on the top two planks on the inside to adhere. So let's just knock the gloss off there, and a little bit on the Kevlar. You're not really going to get much real sanding done. It's going to fuzz up there. The Kevlar doesn't sand really, but you can hit the gloss down just a little bit on the Kevlar kind of quickly. Any real high points will come down with the sandpaper. So just kind of quick. You're not trying to do anything fancy here. Just a little bit off the top edge of the Kevlar, just to smooth it out just a bit and give a bit of an abraded surface for the new epoxy to stick to. And again, I wouldn't worry about the carbon fiber ribbons, especially. I just kind of skip those. You'll get enough adhesion there not to be a problem. So real quick sanding here. And Then we'll finish up with a whisk brush. Got one right at hand here. So after we do all the way around the boat with the sanding, then we'll come back and get the dust off, because we're going to use tape to hold the carbon fiber tube in place on the top edge here, and we want the tape to be able to stick. If it's dusty, it won't stick. So we'll brush off the outside as well. So make sure you get all that sanding dust off and get it cleaned up again. Okay, so that's the prep work. Why don't you go ahead and do that, or I'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and we'll glue the carbon fiber tubes together with the little sleeve in the middle, and we'll be ready to tape the first carbon fiber sleeve tube in place. And that's great, and then we'll get them glued on. Oh, a couple more things that we will be doing, and this again is just kind of prep work, getting ready to put these things in place. We'll be abrading the surface of the carbon fiber rod, and because we want good adhesion there with the epoxy. So you want to rough that surface up a bit all around, and that's again real quick. This is all I'm going to be doing here. I'll do all the rods, but I mean all the tubes, but it's just that much. And again, this is the 100 grit. You could use 150, but I wouldn't go a whole lot finer than that. We're just trying to give a slightly, you can see how the surface, when you get these tubes, is really pretty highly polished, and it's hard for the epoxy to stick to that. Oh, I'm standing right over the boat. You probably don't want to do that to get all that carbon fiber black dust into your boat there. Okay, so we'll be abrading the surface of the carbon fiber rods. I don't know if you can see that now, but this part's dull, this part's shiny. Where I sanded is dull, where it's not sanded it's still shiny, and I'll sand the whole thing all the way down from one end to the other, and then we'll be ready to glue the two tubes, the longer tube, the 8-foot tube, and the 6-foot tube together, and we'll be in good shape. Oh, part of this prep work is cutting that carbon fiber rod that will glue inside the two tubes to join the two tubes together. So let's go ahead and take a look over here, and I'll show you how to cut that rod up, that carbon fiber rod. You just have a short piece of rod. Okay, pull a little closer here. You just have a short piece of rod to work with, and that's plenty though. So cutting the carbon fiber, here's the carbon fiber rod. To cut this, it's going to be easiest if you tape it first. So just blue tape, blue masking tape, right in the center of that piece of rod. Try to get the tape on tight, because what the tape is going to do is keep those fibers from splitting out at the end of the cut. So you want the tape to be on tight. If you want to be precise, you can measure that. It's roughly a 3-inch piece, and we're going to cut it in half. So 1.5 inches. And now a fine tooth hacksaw blade. If you have a coarse tooth hacksaw blade, well, one thing about hacksaws that maybe you already know, but if you keep them tight all the time, the bow will lose its tension, and it'll start to get a permanent bend, and then it's hard to tighten them. If you want your hacksaw to last forever, always loosen the blade after using it. Okay, so there we go. This is a nice hacksaw. Need a little block to press on. Here we go. Okay, and sawing it. A little noisy. You want to saw all the way around the edge before you cut through. So roll that piece until you've sawn all the way around the rod, and then just keep rolling it as you continue sawing. Not a lot of sawing going on here. It doesn't take much. Okay, so we've cut. It's going to be hard to see against my black sweater, isn't it? Black carbon fiber against a black sweater. Maybe you can see that. We've cut all the way around that. I'm rolling it now. We've cut all the way around where we're going to cut through, and we'll keep cutting around. Very very little pressure on the hacksaw to get it cut. And if you have a coarser tooth hacksaw, this is going to be kind of a little tough. You might just try pushing instead of pulling, sliding off the teeth instead of digging in. Okay, we're almost through here. And this is the place where very light pressure at the end, because you're trying not to tear the fibers too much, those final fibers. Back here. This is another technique which works quite nicely, especially at the end. Flip your hacksaw over and move the piece against the blade there. Okay, so we have a nice cut there. Really didn't tear out at all. And tape off. And we'll be good. Okay, so these are the pieces that will be holding the two ends of the carbon fiber rods together. And the inserts. And we want these to be roughened up as well. So the epoxy will adhere to this surface, because again it's a glossy surface that will be hard for the epoxy to stick to. So just kind of abrade these in a random fashion until you've taken off all the gloss. And again, this is the 100 grit sandpaper, the purple, that I think is quite spectacular. Okay, so there, all the gloss is off there now. That's fine. And gets your fingers a little dirty, but that'll wash right off. Okay, I think that's the prep work. I'm going to go ahead and sand the boat, the edges, and then I'll sand the tubes, and then we'll glue the tubes together. We'll get back with you gluing the tubes together with these little carbon fiber inserts. Okay, so we'll be back here very shortly. Good. Okay, we're back. We sanded the top edge all the way around. We weren't trying to change the angle. We just wanted to take off any epoxy bumps and clean it up a little bit. We didn't need to take off all the epoxy either, just any bumps. So that was a real quick job around the edge of the boat all the way around. And then we sanded, not very thoroughly, but we sanded, just a little bit, scuffed up the surface. Not 100% everywhere. Some places still kind of shiny underneath, between the bump, between the abraded part. But top two planks, we scuffed those up a little bit. And then we scuffed up the carbon fiber tube. That's real easy. You just, wrap the sandpaper around it, hold it tight, and slide it up and down. So that's done. And we scuffed up the little carbon fiber rod pieces, 1.5 inch long rod pieces that are going to be the inserts for attaching the carbon fiber tubes together. And now, you may have wondered, some of you may have already done this, you might have done your whole inside with water and to get off the amine blush. Not a bad idea, but since we're not gluing anything onto this, most of the inside, we don't really need to do that. So I haven't done it on this one. And but we do want to get off any blush on those top two planks, because we might have epoxy when we glue on the rail, the carbon fiber tube. We might get epoxy on those top two planks a little bit, and we'd like to get some adhesion there. So at this point, since I want to go ahead and try to get one of these carbon fiber tubes on tonight, I'm going to use acetone to wipe this down instead of water. Warm water would do it, but I'd get the bare wood on the top edge where it is bare wood. I'd get that wet with water, and then I'd have to wait for that to dry before doing my glue up. So I'm just going to wipe it down with acetone. Now you may wonder why we didn't wipe it down before sanding, and there are some good reasons for doing that, for wiping it down before sanding. The big reason is that if you have a lot of blush, your sandpaper gets clogged up with the amine blush, that kind of residue on the surface, real quickly, and it's hard to sand. So if you had a lot of amine blush, you might want to wipe this down with acetone or warm water before sanding, but I did not seem to have too much. So I'm wiping it down afterwards. The advantage of wiping it down afterwards is it's a little slightly smoother surface to wipe down. There are not so many epoxy bumps and ridges and stuff. So it's a little bit easier, especially when you get up back to where the Kevlar is. That might have had some sort of sharp knobblies sticking up. So either way, or you can do it before and after if you want. Do it twice. It only takes a couple minutes. Okay, and then we'll also wipe down these little joining tubes, or the rods. Make sure we get the dust off those. And these were sanded, remember, with the 100 grit. And so we'll wipe these off. And I'll come back and wipe down the rest of the boat in a minute. But let's swing over here. In fact, I'll put the acetone right in the boat so I don't forget to wipe it down, the rest of it. Okay, so there we go. Let's swing over here to the table and we will glue these rods together. I'm going to try to make it go pretty quick here because I'd like to do this one of these rods on tonight, and so I want to set up, and so we have a lamp here, a spotlight, to warm up the resin. And let's see, can you see that? I don't think you can see the spotlight, can you? Let's see what we can do. Maybe I have to pull back a little bit. There, now you can see it. Yeah, right here. So we'll warm up the resin, mix the resin, then we'll warm it up. And here's our resin box. Convenient to have a box for your resin things, keep them all together. Syringes for measuring, clear resin. And still, inside of the top is completely free of resin. I could eat off that. I wouldn't, but if you get resin on the top of the inside top, it'll spill down the sides. It'll get to this edge and then run down the sides and make a mess. And hopefully the hardener's just as good. Yeah, look at that, perfect. Completely clean on the inside of that lid too. These, I do sort of emphasize these things a lot, but the reason I emphasize them is they are really important to making working with epoxy a pleasant and easy and fun and fast and quick and efficient process. If you are dealing with everything being sticky, it is not fun or fast or efficient or easy. Okay, and our syringes, the syringe was left with the plunger pulled part way out, about an inch out. So when I want to use it again, I can force it in, and that breaks the seal and lets it become functional again. Now, we're not talking about much epoxy. Let's just do half of one large mark. So that's 2.5 small marks. It's kind of hard to do much less than that. And lid back on right away, so that won't get knocked over. And again, this hardener plunger was left pulled out, so it is easy to reuse. And I'm going to get two small marks in there, and because it's easier for me to measure that way when I'm just doing half a mark. Now I'll just push out half of one mark. So I'll leave in 1.5 marks there. Okay. And don't short the resin. Don't short the hardener. Okay. Now it's when the heat lamps comes into play. Let's get that going. Okay. Now it's a bit bright. Okay, so I can set that metal orange juice bottom. The can has a metal bottom. I can set it right on the lamp. And that's going to heat that resin up quite nicely. If I heat it too much, it'll go to a water consistency first. That's what I'm trying for. And then it will start to have a little vapor come off of it. Just a little very thin vapor that you can see as a little thin cloud coming off. And then seconds later, it'll be rock hard. So we don't want that. So we're going to where it's pretty warm on the bottom. I can touch it without burning myself. Okay, and that's pretty watery in there. You're not going to be able to see it, but that's pretty much like water. Well, you can see it drip maybe. I don't know if you can see it drip or not. But see, it's dripping almost like water there. So that's going to give me about 7 or 8 minutes. It's fairly cool in this building. It's about 60 degrees. It's December. Although this is a really warm day today and this is unheated. That's why I'm eager to do these rub rails, because some days it's too cold out here to have the epoxy set up. Okay, so don't make sure you don't glue 2 long ones together. That won't work. You want one of the short ones and one of the long ones to glue. There it goes. Now, as far as setting this up, I haven't really got a plan here. Once the won't want to stay anywhere I put it. It wants to roll. There we go. Okay, so we'll coat the insert thoroughly, one end of it. And again, make sure you don't glue 2 short ones together either. You need a long one, a long tube, and a short tube glued together. And slide the insert in. I'm going to slide it in and then back out. And then we're going to coat it again. That was, the whole point of that was to coat the inside of the tube. Okay, so now we're coating it, the insert a second time, and this time we'll just leave it in. We'll slide it in and leave it. Okay, now, let that drip into the pot there. We need one more thing here. We have good knives too, but I didn't want to use a good knife for this especially because it's going to get epoxy on it. So this will hold that piece from sliding, that insert from sliding, with the knife pressed down in the middle. Okay, so now we can coat the other end of the insert very thoroughly. Okay, now this time, since it's a little harder now with that insert sliding in and out of this piece, I'm going to dribble some epoxy down inside this tube. Coat the end and let it run down inside there a little bit. It's still pretty runny because I heated it up. Okay, so that should give plenty inside there. Now a bit of a trick here to slide these together. I need another set of hands actually, but maybe we can do it this way. Put it on the box, and now I'm using the knife, the edge of the knife. I'm not cutting that carbon fiber rod, I'm just holding it from sliding because I don't want it to slide all the way into that first piece and not have any in the second piece. I want it centered. Okay, as I said, a little tricky here, but takes a little dexterity. Okay, there we go. And that center piece stayed in place, it did not slide. If it slid all the way, you know, when pushing them together, if you slid that joining rod all the way back into the first piece, there wouldn't be any joining in the second piece. It wouldn't do its job. So, so you want to make sure you've held it tight with the knife blade. And if it's a good knife, wipe it off right away, please. This knife blade I don't really care too much about. Okay, and paper towel. Might do that over, wouldn't do that over your dining room table. It's likely to drip a little bit. Now you don't want really, you don't want to have the joint be dry, but you don't really want excess on the outside either. Okay, now that looks pretty good. Now if we can get that over our heat lamp, we'll be cooking. There we go. Okay. Now, just a little tip on this. I've got the heat lamp. That's about 2 inches from the carbon fiber. It's going to warm that up really quite hot and set that epoxy off quite quickly. Now we can do this with carbon fiber. You can't do this with wood. You do this with wood, and the wood all the air in the wood will start to expand, and it'll bubble constantly, and you'll have like you know, bubble bath kind of mixture of epoxy. It'll all be bubbles and not have any strength. But with carbon fiber, the carbon fiber rod, of course, doesn't have any air in its pores or anything like wood would, and so we can heat it up and get it set off quite quickly. And my experience is that that doesn't really seem to affect the strength of the epoxy. Technically, maybe it's not the best approach, but I do it all the time, and I've never had any problem with it. So with wood, you can't do it though. Don't do it with wood. Okay. So I'll just do the same thing for the second one, and again, like all epoxy jobs, I'll be checking this at 5 minutes, at 10 minutes, at 20 minutes, and make sure that my joint hasn't skidded apart or something. Okay, I don't think that, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's anything pulling it apart, but don't ever trust it. Epoxy's slippery and sneaky. If you think, well, I've got it perfect, and it's a little hard to see what's going on here. You think, oh, I've got it perfect, and you leave and come back and it's slid, you know, 1/4 of an inch apart. You're not going to be pleased, and it's not well, there are a few things you could do, but there's no, it's easier just to get it right the first time. Okay, so I'll do the second one. We'll let this set up while I have dinner, and then we'll come back and see if we can get the first one taped in place, and get some epoxy gluing it on. Oh, one other step that we'll do after this is set up is we'll, at the bow, we'll try to make a nice beveled cut, sanding the end of the carbon fiber rod with a nice beveled cut. Hard to look your direction because of the light here. We'll make a nice beveled sanded end, so the two pieces of carbon fiber will mate nicely at the bow. And we'll do the same, we'll cut off the excess at the stern and see if we can do a beveled cut at the stern as well. So they come together nicely. Just a nice, not technically necessary, but kind of a nice detail if we can get that looking right. Okay, good. We'll talk to you later. Bye.